Welcome back, brothers, to Amalur. Tonight's story, we're diving into the lore of Dorn's defense of the Imperial Palace. Before getting on the madness, be sure to like and comment any videos and topics you want to see in the future. Be sure to subscribe from the Emperor. I want to thank you guys for the support. I've been killing it like always. Now, let's get into the video.
The Imperial Palace had begun to die before the first shell fell. Its death was not loud, not at first. It did not come with fire from orbit, nor with the black thunder of traitor engines clawing through Terra's polluted heavens. It began with chisels against marble, with plasma cutters biting into gilded archways, with servo haulers dragging statues of forgotten conquerors from their plinths and breaking them beneath adamantium rams. It began with men sobbing as they tore down the beauty of mankind's throne world, and with transhuman warriors watching those tears in silence. Gold leaf peeled from cathedral vaults in curling strips. Frescoes older than the unity of Terra were blasted from the walls, their saints and generals reduced to dust beneath the white glare of cutting torches. Floors that had once reflected processions of remembrancers, diplomats, iterators, lords militant and gene-wrought demigods were ripped open to expose cable veins, coolant ducts, ammunition lifts, and the black iron of reinforcement spars. Marble went into barricades, bronze went into shell casings, silver filigree was melted for machine spirit conduits, ivory reliquaries became splinter shields, sacred wood, carried from dead forests that no longer existed beneath any Terran sky, was fed into furnace mouths, because Prometheum had to be preserved for the killing grounds. The palace was not a palace any longer. It was becoming a weapon. Rogal Dorn stood in the heart of a ceremonial avenue that had once been called the Processional of Stellar Compliance. It had been built wide enough for Titans to kneel in honor before the master of mankind. Its walls had been sheathed in polished stone, its ceiling lost in a haze of incense and sun lamps, its pillars carved with the names of worlds brought into the Emperor's light. Now the avenue was divided by layered firing steps, tank traps, retractable blast shutters, and overlapping murder ports. Servo arms hung from the ceiling like the limbs of dead insects. Munition servitors rolled on squealing tracks through powdered marble, their dead eyes glowing beneath brass hoods as they hauled crates of bolt shells, cells, crack missiles, and promethium canisters into recessed magazines. The names of compliant worlds were disappearing beneath sheets of riveted armor. Dorn watched them vanish. He wore warplate the color of old bone and winter stone, trimmed in black and gold. No ornament softened him, no cloak moved behind him, no laurel crowned him. He did not need such things. His face was cut from severity itself, pale and hard, with eyes that weighed men, walls, weapons, and futures by the same measure. Beside him, mortal officials in robes of office trembled amid the thunder of labor. They had come bearing scrolls, seals, genealogies, authority purchased through bloodlines and favors that meant nothing now. One of them stepped forward, old enough to have watched the palace shine in years before the galaxy broke. His ceremonial chain was heavy across his chest. Dust had settled in the wrinkles of his face. "My Lord Primarch," he said, bowing so deeply that his voice struck the floor before it reached Dorn. "This district contains records from the first pacification treaties. The murals above the western transept were commissioned by the Emperor's own decree. The Hall of Oaths contains gifts from compliant worlds that no longer exist. If they are destroyed, they cannot be restored." Dorn did not look at him immediately. His gaze remained on the work crews cutting apart the avenue. "They will not be restored," he said. The official swallowed. "Lord, those works are memory. They are proof of what mankind has endured, what it has achieved." At last Dorn turned his head. The movement was slight. It ended the man's courage. "Memory has no tactical value if the palace falls." The words landed with more force than anger would have carried. There was no contempt in them, no cruelty of expression. That made them worse. Dorn did not hate the man. He did not hate the art. He did not hate the past. He had simply placed them on the scale and found them wanting. Another official, younger and more foolish, raised his eyes. The people will see this as desecration. The people will see nothing if they are dead. My lord, morale must be preserved. Dorn looked past him to the western arch, where a statue of a winged victory was being lowered by chains. Around its throat, its face, carved in triumph, cracked as the winches tightened. The head broke free and struck the floor. The impact shook dust from the ceiling. Men flinched. Imperial fists did not. Morale, Dorn said, is preserved by walls that hold. He gestured once. Archimus stepped from behind him, armor darkened by the dust of demolition. The Huskarl carried his helm beneath one arm and a sheaf of authorization slates in the other. His face bore the same unyielding discipline as all sons of the 7th Legion, though in him it was sharpened by proximity to the Primarch. He handed the first slate to the nearest official. By command of the Praetorian, Archimus said, all ceremonial protections assigned to this district are revoked. All archives not already removed are surrendered to the war effort. All personnel are reassigned to logistics, labor, munitions, casualty clearance, or auxiliary defense. Refusal is dereliction under siege statute. The older official stared at the slate as if it were a death warrant. It was, not for him alone, for the world he remembered. Dorn walked on. The palace stretched around him like a continent given iron organs. It rose through cloud banks and descended into the oldest bones of Terra. It was not a building, not truly. It was a world within the world, a chained empire of towers, sublevels, fortresses, cathedrals, manufactoria, vaults, and arterial roads. Atmosphere-piercing spaceports stabbed upward through the poisoned sky, their landing plates large enough to receive fleets of landers and war engines. Beneath them, buried hundreds of miles deep, were vaults older than the Imperium, sealed chambers where forgotten machines dreamed in static and dust. Macro-habs clung to the slopes and walls like barnacles on a fortress hull, each one home to generations that had never seen an open horizon. Temple districts had been gutted into triage halls. Weapon spires rose where gardens had once breathed. Void shield projectors squatted in reinforced sanctums, surrounded by adepts whose prayers were equations and whose blood fed the cogitators drop by drop. The Himalaysian approaches had been cut into terraces of death. Roads became fire lanes. Pilgrim routes became armored corridors. Bridges were mined. Tunnels were mapped, countermined, flooded, collapsed, or packed with charges sufficient to bury armies. Every approach had a name. Every name had a cost. That was the language Dorn understood. He entered the strategium beneath Barb Bastion without ceremony. The chamber had once been an observatory of stars. Now it held terror in chains of light. A command hololith burned above the central dais, projecting the Imperial Palace and the lands around it in layered translucence. Defense lines glowed in gold. Enemy approach predictions pulsed in red. Reserves hovered in blue. Evacuation routes shone pale, thin and vulnerable, like veins beneath skin. Constantine Valdor stood at the opposite side of the hololith, still as a spear planted before a tomb. His auramite armor caught the projection's light and returned it as a muted glow. The Captain General's face was calm, in a way no mortal face could be calm. He seemed less a warrior than a judgment preserved in flesh. Praetorian, Valdor said. Captain General. No greeting followed. None was required. Archimus took position at Dorn's left. Adepts bent over consoles around them, murmuring in Binharic, High Gothic, battle cant, and exhausted whispers. Vox officers listened to the growl of the outer system. Scribes recorded orders that would kill cities. No one in the chamber pretended otherwise. Dorn touched the hololith. The outer curtain magnified, revealing habitation stacks clustered behind the first defense arcs. Tens of millions of life signs shimmered there in pale motes. Workers, menials, bonded laborers, archive clans, oath serfs, refugees from broken provinces, half-trained auxilia raised from palace districts and issued lasguns they barely understood. They were massed in corridors never designed for escape, waiting for orders, rations, weapons, reassurance. Dorn marked several stacks in red. The color spread through them like disease. Archimus looked at the zones and understood at once. Valdor did not react. "Those are still inhabited," said one of the mortal logisticians before fear could stop him. "Yes," Dorn said. "My lord, their evacuation is incomplete." "It will remain incomplete." The man's hands tightened around his data slate. "There are millions within those stacks." Dorn enlarged the map again. The red zones became barriers between projected breach points and the inner supply arteries. If the outer curtain breaks here, here, and here, those stacks become approach routes. If cult infection rises within them, they become enemy staging grounds. If warp manifestation takes hold in the lower transit chambers, they become an open wound inside the palace. He signed the decree with a press of his gauntleted thumb. The hololith accepted his gene seal. Somewhere far below, blast doors would begin to close. Security engines would awaken. Bulkhead spirits would receive commandments written in cold authority. Food routes would be redirected. Ventilation could be severed. Prometheum floods could be released. Collapse charges could be armed. The logistician went pale. "You are sealing them into a firebreak. I am preventing a breach corridor. They are loyal. They are located in the wrong place." Silence followed. It was Valdor who spoke next. Harsh. Dorn looked at him across the flickering image of Terra. "Necessary. Those are often mistaken for the same thing. Not by me." For a moment the two of them regarded one another, the Emperor's guardian and the Emperor's wall. Around them the palace labored and bled in preparation for wounds not yet received. Then the strategium doors opened. Sigismund entered like a blade drawn in a chapel. His armor was black in places where it had once been yellow, not by heraldry alone, but by scorch marks, oil, and the grime of endless readiness. His face was severe, lean, hollowed by something Dorn had not given him and did not trust. Faith had taken root in him, not loyalty. Loyalty had always been there. This was different. It burned behind his eyes with the troubling purity of men who had begun to need meaning more than command. He knelt. "My lord." Dorn did not bid him rise at once. The chamber watched without appearing to watch. Archimus was still. Valdor's gaze did not move. Sigismund kept his head bowed. Perhaps he expected judgment. Perhaps he expected forgiveness. Perhaps he expected nothing and wished to be wrong. Dorn gave him duty. "The 3rd and 4th counter-assault cadres are yours," Dorn said. "You will take command of mobile reserves beneath the western processional arteries. You will not commit without my order. You will not pursue beyond assigned kill boundaries. You will not answer provocation from traitor champions. You will preserve force integrity until released." Sigismund raised his head. "My lord, if the traitors breach the western arteries, speed will matter more than preservation. Obedience will matter more than both." The words cut harder than rebuke. Sigismund accepted them without flinching, but Dorn saw the wound. He saw everything that mattered in a weapon: balance, edge, strain, flaw. "I will obey," Sigismund said. "You will do more than obey. You will remember that wrath is not strategy." Sigismund's mouth tightened. "No, lord. And faith is not a plan." The silence deepened. Sigismund bowed his head again. "No, lord." Dorn dismissed him with a glance. The first captain rose and withdrew, leaving behind the faint impression of a sword returned to its sheath before it had tasted blood. Dorn watched him go. He felt no comfort in the strength of his sons. Strength was only useful if it held shape under pressure. Zeal deformed. Zeal made men spend themselves before the wall required it. Malcador came later, though none saw him enter. The sigillite appeared at the edge of the hololith, as if he had stepped out from a fold in the chamber's shadow. He looked ancient enough to shame the palace stones, robed in grey, leaning on his staff, his eyes carrying burdens no fortress could bear. Around him the adepts lowered their voices. Even the machine chatter seemed to soften. "Rogal," he said. "Sigillite." Malcador studied the red zones on the map. His expression did not change, but something colder than sorrow moved through his eyes. "You have begun burying your own people. I began when I accepted command. That is not what I mean. It is what it means." The old man sighed, and for an instant he seemed less like the Emperor's regent and more like the last witness to a dream, already turning to ash. "Horus will not only attack your walls," Malcador said. "He will attack sleep, memory, trust. He will set brother against brother in sealed corridors. He will poison prayers, turn hunger into revelation, make men hear voices in the static. The Neverborn will come where guns cannot aim. Belief will rot. Sanity will become a gate with broken hinges." Dorn looked back to the hololith. Red approach paths, gold bastions, blue reserves, pale evacuation routes, billions of possible deaths arranged into sequence. Madness can be contained if its routes of advance are mapped. Malcador gave a thin, humorless smile. "Only you would try to fortify the human soul with barricades. If it must hold a passage, it can be fortified. And if it breaks, then it is sealed." The Sigillite's smile died. Before he could answer, the strategium changed. A Vox officer stiffened at his station. His hand rose to the side of his headset, as though he could force the words back into the ether. The Auspex banks began to shriek in layered alarm tones. Across the hololith, the outer system flared with sudden red. One rune became 10, then hundreds, then a storm. Defense spheres awakened. Kill spheres populated with enemy mass signatures. Astropathic relays spat warnings in voices that were not entirely human by the time they reached the chamber. "Contact," the Vox officer said, and his voice cracked on the word. Multiple translation events beyond the outer watch. Fleet elements confirmed. Additional contacts emerging. Mass displacement exceeds projected vanguard strength. Repeating, mass displacement exceeds projected vanguard strength. Another officer spoke over him. "Outer pickets requesting confirmation of engagement protocols." "Confirmed," Dorn said. "Lord, fleet identification markers are corrupted. We have returns consistent with Sons of Horus capital ships, Death Guard, Iron Warriors, World Eaters, Emperor's Children, and Allied Mechanicum assets." "Confirmed," Dorn said again. "Orders to Luna? Hold. Orders to orbital platforms? Fire when solutions are clean. Orders to civilian evacuation channels?" Dorn looked at the pale roots on the hololith. Thin veins, weaknesses, delays, panic given geography. "Reclassify them." The officer turned slowly. "My lord?" "All remaining evacuation routes within the palace perimeter are reclassified as military arteries. Civilian movement is subordinate to ammunition transit, armor redeployment, medici evacuation, reinforcement flow, and corpse clearance. Any obstruction is to be removed. Any unauthorized mass movement is to be redirected, contained, or suppressed." No one spoke. Outside the strategium, the palace continued to die by its own command. The sound of its transformation came through the walls. Hammers, engines, chanting adepts, collapsing stone, marching boots, the groan of blast doors closing for the first time in centuries. Beyond Terra, the War Master's fleets entered the killing dark of Sol. The war that had burned the galaxy had come home. Dorn remained before the projection after the others withdrew to their stations and duties. Valdor had gone to the inner sanctums. Archimus had taken the decrees to the Huskarl command net. Malcador lingered a moment longer, then faded into whatever shadows still belonged to him. Sigismund was already moving toward the west, carrying obedience like a chain around his throat. The Praetorian stood alone with terror. He did not pray. Prayer was for those who believed the universe could be persuaded. He calculated. The Helios bastion would hold for 9 hours under full assault if its shield relays survived. The western processional arteries could be converted into a secondary slaughter channel if the outer curtain failed before the third reserve mustered. The sealed habitation stacks would deny the enemy 3 direct approaches or cost the palace 4 million labor bodies if famine began before ignition protocols were required. The Lion's Gate would need to hold long enough to deny heavy landings. The Eternity approaches could not be exposed until all outer sacrifices were spent. Ammunition consumption would exceed replenishment by the second continuous bombardment cycle. Mortal cohesion would fracture sooner than stone. Legion cohesion would not. He moved. Markers with small motions of his hand. Here, a wall would die. Here, men would die. Here, a city within the palace would be burned by loyal hands if the enemy touched it. Here, his sons would stand until their bones were powder inside their armor. Dorn watched the red storm gather around Terra and reduced horror into time. How long each wall must hold, how many lives each hour would cost, where he would spend them first. Soul burned without flame. At the edge of the system, where the Emperor's light was a distant wound against the black, the first defense spheres woke in silence. Minefields unfolded from dormancy. Machine spirits that had slept for decades beneath skins of ice and dust opened their blind eyes and tasted the gravity wakes of incoming murder. Orbital weapon stations rotated on ancient axes, their targeting augers twitching as if stirred from nightmares. Monitor fortresses bled power into lance capacitors. Hidden torpedo racks armed themselves in the dark. Astropathic relays screamed warnings through minds already cracked by strain. The War Master had come. His armada did not arrive as a fleet should arrive. It came like a disease entering blood. Translation wounds split the void in layers of impossible color, and from those wounds emerged capital ships, escorts, mass conveyors, troop hulks, mechanicum arc vessels, forge tenders, corrupted battleships, and the corpse-black shapes of vessels that had once borne Imperial honor. Their hulls were scarred by oaths, cut away, and replaced by jagged icons, bronze sigils, flayed banners, and the crawling geometries of the warp. Some still wore the old marks beneath the filth, as if the past itself had been chained to treachery and dragged screaming into war. The loyalist pickets fired first. They were not expected to survive. Rogal Dorn had known that when he placed them. He stood beneath Terra, in a chamber beneath a chamber, beneath a fortress whose roots entered the bones of the Himalasian massif. Around him, the layered strategium descended like a cathedral built for mathematics. Each tier held officers, adepts, vox savants, fleet liaisons, noospheric interpreters, and oath-bound scribes whose quills scratched even as their hands shook. The great hololithic well at the center of the chamber showed Saul as rings of light and death. Every defensive sphere was a circle. Every vessel was a rune. Every minefield was a dusting of gold motes waiting to become fire. Dorn watched the first picket line vanish. No one in the chamber spoke. The outermost frigates and destroyers had been positioned beyond hope of relief. Their captains had known their orders. Engage, delay, force enemy course correction, bleed Auspex data through death, die in formation. They obeyed with the clean loyalty of men who had already been buried in Dorn's calculations. The first loyalist destroyer struck a traitor mine prow with a spread of plasma torpedoes. The enemy vessel shuddered, vented atmosphere, and split open amidships. 1,000 crewmen became glittering frost as they were pulled into the void, mouths open, blood boiling in their eyes before it froze across their cheeks. The destroyer did not live long enough to celebrate. Lance fire from a Sons of Horus cruiser crossed the black and cut it from bow to stern. Ammunition decks ignited. The little ship became a brief sun, bright enough to blind augurs for 3 heartbeats. Dorn marked the flare and moved the next line inward. Picket Vordran is gone, said a fleet officer. Confirmed, Dorn said. Picket Helios is engaged by 3 cruiserweight contacts. Order them to burn lateral and seed their remaining mines. My lord, that will expose their flank. It is already exposed. The officer transmitted the order. On the hololith, Helios obeyed. The formation turned, burning hard into a suicidal arc, scattering its last payload across the enemy's predicted advance. Traitor vessels adjusted. That adjustment forced 3 heavier ships into a narrower approach vector, where dormant gravitic mines woke and hurled themselves into void shields. The explosions did not kill the enemy. They stripped power, overloaded shield harmonics, and forced the traitors deeper into the lanes Dorn had prepared. He did not smile. Every loyalist defeat left behind a shape. The War Master's fleet advanced into that shape. Beyond the strategium, the palace was still being carved apart and reborn as a corpse machine. Marble dust lay on artillery shells. Statues became barricades. Processional roads became tank arteries. Habitation districts vanished behind closing blast doors. Terra was not ready. It would never be ready. But every hour taken from Horus became another gun mounted, another shield circuit awakened, another million shells stacked in darkness, another wall taught how to kill. That was what the pickets bought. Not victory. Time. The Vox screamed with another channel opening. Praetorian, this is Admiral Coven of the Orison Flotilla. We have lost primary voids. Port batteries are gone. Reactor containment is unstable. Enemy boarders are reported in our aft decks. I request permission to withdraw behind the Jovian debris screen. The Admiral's voice was controlled, but beneath it lived fire, decompression, and men dying in the dark. Dorn looked at the rune representing the Orison Flotilla. 3 cruisers, 11 escorts, 2 crippled supply hulks fitted with torpedo racks because there had been no time to make them anything better. Their position lay ahead of a denser orbital debris field, exactly where Dorn had placed them. Denied, Dorn said. A pause. My lord, we cannot hold. You are not required to hold. My lord, you will maintain position until hull failure. Your wrecks will complete the debris screen. Your reactors are to be scuttled when enemy mass enters detonation range. The channel carried only static for a moment. Then Coven spoke again, lower. I understand. Do you? Yes, Lord. We are to die in place. You are to obstruct in place. Death is incidental. The Admiral breathed once. Perhaps he laughed. Perhaps the Vox turned pain into distortion. For Terra, then. For the Emperor, Dorn replied, and closed the channel. Archimus stood to his left, helm locked beneath one arm, eyes on the display. If he felt anything, it did not reach his face. A Huskarl understood the purpose of stone. Stone did not question the wall it became. Fleet cohesion in the outer third is collapsing, Archimus said. It was designed to. Their deaths are forcing the War Master inward. Yes, at great cost. Dorn moved another cluster of runes. At relevant cost. The phalanx hung in the inner display, like a golden continent adrift in darkness. Even reduced to a hololithic form, the fortress vessel dominated every projection around it. Its mass was absurd, its firepower beyond the measure of lesser ships, its shield geometry a marvel older than most Imperial wars. To many in the chamber, it was more than a vessel. It was the fist of the 7th Legion given form. It was sanctuary, bastion, oath, and weapon. Dorn regarded it as he regarded everything else, a resource. Do not commit the phalanx to full burn, he said. One of the fleet liaisons stiffened. My lord, its batteries could break the second advance wave if brought forward, and expose it to envelopment by the third. It is the greatest fortress ship in the fleet. It is a ship. The liaison bowed his head. Yes, Lord. It will fire when its fire alters the enemy's movement. Not before, not for symbolism, not for glory. The order passed downward through command channels and outward through the void. The phalanx remained where Dorn had placed it, immense and restrained, its wrath held on chains. Far from Terra, Sigismund fought in a dead frigate that had no name left. The vessel had once been a loyal picket ship. Its bridge was gone, its spine broken, its reactors cooling into poisonous silence. It tumbled through the void amid shards of armor plating, frozen bodies and ribbons of fuel vapor. Traitor assault craft had latched onto its corpse to use it as cover, and sons of Horus were cutting through its belly toward a still functioning auger core. Sigismund had been sent to deny them. He moved through zero gravity, with his boarding shield locked to his left arm and his sword mag-clamped across his back. Around him, Imperial fists drifted and struck in disciplined bursts, boots locking to deck, releasing, turning, firing. Their armor was scarred yellow and black, void-sealed, pocked by shrapnel, and painted with frost from ruptured atmosphere. Bolters spoke in hard, measured bursts. Muzzle flashes lit corridors filled with floating blood. A son of Horus came through the smoke, green plate. Cracked, eye lenses burning red. He fired as he advanced. Bolt rounds struck Sigismund's shield and detonated in brief suns, hammering him backward through the airless passage. Sigismund hit a wall, locked one boot, and pushed off with controlled violence. He collided with the traitor shield first. The impact drove the enemy into a bulkhead hard enough to buckle ceramite. Sigismund's sword came free. In the weightless dark, there was no flourish, no wasted motion, no cry of triumph. The blade entered beneath the traitor's gorget and came out through the back of the helm. Blood jetted in globes, black in the emergency lumen glow. Sigismund tore the blade free and let the corpse spin away. Forward, he voxed. His warriors obeyed. The next compartment was a ruin of men and machines. Sons of Horus Terminators had breached through the lower deck, their armor heavy enough that their movement in zero gravity was brutal and awkward, but still relentless. Imperial fists met them with boarding shields, chain blades, and power fists. Bolters detonated against plate. Chain teeth shrieked without air, the sound carried through armor contact and bone. A fist slammed a thunder hammer into a Terminator's knee, shattering the joint. Another drove a power fist into the traitor's chest and crushed the warrior inside his own armor. Blood, organ matter, and shards of blackened rib sprayed from ruptured seals and drifted in a slow, expanding cloud. Sigismund saw none of it as horror. He saw angles, threats, openings. A Justarin officer turned toward him, tusked helm crowned in brass, combi bolter spitting fire. The round struck Sigismund's shield, and one burst through, exploding against his pauldron. Pain flared, warning runes flashed. Sigismund ignored them. He drove forward, shield battering aside the weapon, sword rising in a two-handed arc. The traitor caught the blow on a power claw. Sparks scattered like dead stars. "Little wall son," the Justarin voxed. "Your father spends you cheaply." Sigismund pressed harder. "He spends us where we are required." The Justarin laughed. Sigismund killed him before the sound finished. The sword cut through the traitor's wrist, then reversed and opened his throat seals. Pressure burst from the wound. Blood followed. Sigismund drove the blade deeper, through meat, through the reinforced collar, into the spine. He kicked the corpse away and turned to the auger core. "Charges," he said. An Imperial fist placed melter charges along the core housing. Another brother died covering him, his helm punched inward by a power fist until the skull inside became paste against the rear of the helm. Sigismund saw the death, recorded the loss, and gave no lament. The charges armed. "Withdraw." They left through the ship's broken skin, leaping into the void as the auger core died behind them in white fire. The frigate's corpse continued tumbling, now blind, now useless to the enemy. Sigismund's squad fell back toward their assault craft through a storm of debris and frozen dead. Above them, the void war unfolded in silence too vast for sound. Ships died by the hundred. Crewmen trapped behind bulkheads hammered until their fists broke, then froze when the compartments split. Ammunition decks detonated and turned cruisers inside out. Plasma drives went critical, blooming with blue-white fury that left after-images across auger feeds. Boarding torpedoes punched into hulls like iron teeth. Defense lasers carved glowing wounds across battleships. Traitor vessels burned and still advanced. Loyalist vessels shattered and still fired until their guns lost power. Astropathic choirs carried Dorn's orders through the storm. They paid insanity. In a sealed chamber beneath the palace, blindfolded psychers sat in copper restraints, their skulls threaded with silver wire. Overseers chanted litanies of focus, while medici servitors waited with bone saws and injector rigs. Each message from Dorn passed through them as a blade through flesh. Some wept blood. Some caught fire from within, their skin glowing before splitting along the veins. One choirmaster transmitted a withdrawal order to the Saturnine Orbital Reserve and died with his tongue cooked black in his mouth. Another spoke coordinates for a mine detonation, then screamed in a voice not his own until a custodian aide put a guardian spear through his heart. The messages went out. The trap tightened. Aboard the vengeful spirit, deep within the War Master's moving court of iron and shadow, Horus's commanders watched the loyalist lines die and understood too late that death was not failure. The sons of Horus saw the pattern first because pride made them look for insult. The Iron Warriors confirmed it because siegecraft made them respect obstruction. Every retreat forced the traitor armada into narrower approach lanes. Every crippled loyalist ship became a drifting barricade. Every minefield that failed to kill still altered momentum. Every sacrifice delayed landing trajectories by minutes, then hours. Dorn was losing the void correctly. That angered them more than resistance. Perturabo, wherever his cold gaze fell upon the calculations, would have understood. Abaddon understood enough to hate it. The War Master had brought a storm great enough to drown suns, and Dorn had answered by teaching each drop of loyal blood where to fall. Still, Horus advanced. That was the horror of it. The traitor fleet could lose ships and remain a continent of iron. It could bleed troops into the void and still have armies enough to blacken Terra's skies. It could spend frigates, cruisers, escorts, transports, knights, engines, legionaries, and mortal millions, and the mass behind them did not end. The War Master's strength was not merely power, it was surplus. He had made abundance into atrocity. The Orison flotilla died on schedule. Its surviving cruiser held position with half its hull open to space, guns firing from compartments filled with corpses, strapped to their stations by frozen blood. When the traitor mass entered the projected range, Admiral Coven transmitted the final code. The cruiser's reactor containment failed by command. The blast consumed its own escorts, 3 enemy prows and a cluster of assault carriers, trying to slip through the debris field. The wreckage spread exactly where Dorn had required it. The hololith updated. A new barrier appeared in gold. "Orison destroyed," said the fleet officer. His voice was thin. "Mark the debris field as active obstruction," Dorn said. "Yes, my lord." "Redirect inner torpedo platforms to fire through the gap at vector ash grey." "My lord, that will require them to expose to counter-battery fire." "They will expose." "Yes, lord." There were no cheers in the strategium. Cheers belonged to men who believed battle turned on moments of relief. Dorn's war allowed no relief, only sequence. Hours passed, or perhaps they were minutes. Time became telemetry, casualty reports, reactor failures, ammunition consumption, shield integrity, and the recurring red bloom of fresh traitor translation signatures. The outer spheres guttered, the middle spheres ignited. Luna burned under bombardment, its defense stations trading fire with traitor ships that came too close and paid for proximity in molten armor. Mars glowed like a diseased coal, its ancient forges divided by loyalty and corruption, its red face crawling with war signs that looked, from Terra, like infection beneath skin. The sky above the throne world filled with enemy markers. Terra was alone, not empty of defenders, never that. The palace crawled with soldiers, demigods, engines, guns, priests, adepts, laborers, and the doomed. The void still held loyal ships. The phalanx still waited. Luna still bled defiance. But isolation was not the absence of strength. It was the knowledge that no retreat existed behind the final wall. Dorn received the last reports from the outer defensive sphere as the first traitor vanguard entered range of Terra's deeper guns. A scribe placed the casualty slate before him with both hands. The man's fingers were stained with ink and blood from where his nails had split under hours of writing. Dorn read: fleet assets lost, picket formations annihilated, monitor stations silent, astropathic choirs depleted, surviving vessels falling inward, enemy advance delayed by the required margin, palace readiness increased by projected increments, void debris distribution favorable, mine reserves reduced, orbital guns awakening, civilian evacuation subordinate to military necessity, Terra sealed. The chamber waited. Dorn lowered the slate. Acceptable, he said. No one answered. No one needed to. Above them, the heavens filled with the War Master's guns. Beneath them, the palace finished sharpening itself on the bones of its own defenders. And Rogal Dorn, Praetorian of Terra, prepared to spend murdered worlds of manpower as calmly as another commander might spend shells. Horus opened the sky. The first lance strike descended without sound, a white line cast from the heavens to the poisoned crown of Terra. It touched the horizon beyond the palace and became a second dawn. For an instant, the cloud banks over the throne world turned to bone, every tower, gantry, habstack, and defense spire etched in stark brilliance. Then the light expanded. A hive district older than some human empires vanished beneath it. The upper levels flashed into glass. The lower levels became steam and ash. Men died as silhouettes against walls that no longer existed a heartbeat later. Streets became molten canals. Hab towers folded inward like paper held over flame. The shockwave rolled across the wasteland, carrying dust, pulverized stone, cooked flesh, and fragments of names no one would ever speak again. The bombardment followed. Macro shells fell in screaming arcs from ships too distant to see with mortal eyes. Some struck void shields and broke against invisible barriers, bursting in vast flowers of fire. Others fell beyond the palace aegis and turned the outer territories into a furnace. Cyclonic shockwaves rolled through the ruined techno-slums and corpse cities that ringed the Himalaysian redoubt. Atmospheric pressure killed before shrapnel arrived. Men were lifted from trenches and torn apart in mid-air, their armor straps snapping, their limbs spreading like broken devotional icons. Burning fragments of loyalist ships rained down from orbit, each piece a meteor of blackened plasteel and human remains. A cruiser's prow, still bearing the half-melted Aquila of the Imperium, fell through the cloud cover and carved a crater through an entire militia staging ground. Thousands disappeared beneath the impact. Those farther out staggered up without faces, their lungs full of dust, their skin hanging in strips beneath helmets fused to their skulls. Terra had known pollution, war, and starvation. It had known the tyranny of old night, the bloodshed of unity, the grinding hunger of empire. Now it knew the hatred of a son returning to murder his father's house. The sky became a kiln. Ash storms rose in black columns and raced along the palace approaches. The sun vanished behind smoke, but there was light enough from the burning world. Beyond the outer defense lines, entire population districts were erased in sheets of white fire. Their inhabitants left no corpses. Only pressure shadows remained, black human outlines printed across walls before those walls cracked and came down. The wind carried radioactive dust into the mouths of men praying in trenches. They spat grey mud and blood and kept their hands on their laser guns. In the command chambers beneath Barb Bastion, the bombardment arrived as numbers before it arrived as thunder. The hololith showed impact blooms across Terra's surface, each one a pulse of red and white. The palace glowed gold at the center, wrapped in shield geometry and defensive calculations. Around it, loss spread like rot through meat. Rogal Dorn watched the sky fall. The chamber shook as another orbital strike battered the Aegis. Dust sifted from the vaulted ceiling. One mortal officer crossed himself in an old Terran gesture and seemed ashamed of it the moment after. Dorn did not turn. His gauntleted hands rested on the edge of the command dais. His face held no awe, no grief, no anger. The bombardment was not an outrage to him in that moment. It was a problem of force distribution. Interceptor wings, Talon 8 through Talon 12, request launch authority, said a void liaison. His voice was raw from hours of relaying death. They report civilian columns trapped outside the western shelter nets. Enemy bombardment is walking toward them. Dorn studied the display. The columns were pale motes in the waste, moving with the pathetic slowness of frightened flesh. Above them, the next predicted strike pattern descended in crimson arcs. Denied. The liaison looked up. My lord, they are within minutes of annihilation. The wings remain grounded. They can still reach the columns. They will preserve ammunition for landing craft and Titan transports. The man's jaw worked. He lowered his eyes. As commanded. Dorn shifted 3 squadrons on the hololith, holding them beneath the protection of layered, anti-orbital batteries. Aircraft were not hope. They were not banners. They were not comfort. They were munitions with engines, and Dorn would not spend them to rescue men already killed by geography. On the surface projection, the pale motes vanished beneath a bloom of white. No one mentioned them again. The palace Aegis drank the wrath of the War Master and shuddered. Its void shield layers flared like artificial suns, dome within dome, colorless force made visible only by the violence breaking against it. Lance strikes spread across the shields in blazing webs. Macro shells detonated with city-killing fury and were reduced to rippling distortion. Plasma impacts boiled the air along the shield skin until storms formed and died in seconds. Every strike fed strain into the great projectors buried across the palace, and the projectors answered with agony. In the shield sanctums, Mechanicum adepts chanted Binharic litanies through mouths augmented with brass grills. Their voices clicked, hissed, and overlapped in streams of sacred equation. Incense burned around reactor housings. Servo skulls drifted through heat haze, carrying vials of blessed oil, and coiled his body was dragged away. Another adept took his socket. The chant did not cease. Outside the shields, the first traitor landings began. They fell through fire and flak in black swarms, assault craft and drop pods and engine cradles wrapped in the burning skins of atmospheric entry. Sons of Horus came first, where the Auspex returns were cleanest, green-black assault formations descending with the arrogance of warriors who had once led the Great Crusade and now came to claim its corpse. Their drop pods struck the outer trenches with seismic force, doors blasting outward, bolters already firing. Imperial army soldiers died in red sprays against their own firing steps. The survivors answered with laser guns, autocannons, and heavy bolters, their officers screaming range corrections while vox links dissolved into static. The Death Guard came where the air was already poisoned. Their transports did not evade fire so much as endure it, descending through flak with obscene patience. When their ramps opened, fog rolled out before them, yellow-grey and thick with chemical rot. Men who breathed it drowned standing up. Rebreathers failed. Eyes burst. Skin blistered beneath uniform collars. The warriors of the 14th Legion advanced through it like grave markers given motion, bolters coughing, rusted blades ready, their silence more terrible than rage. The World Eaters did not descend with discipline. They fell like thrown axes. Drop pods slammed into trench lines and hab ruins, and the warriors within erupted outward in white and blue armor, already slick with blood from their own passage. Chain axes screamed. They did not secure ground. They violated it. They vaulted barricades, tore men from gun pits, smashed skulls against armor plating, opened bodies from groin to throat, and howled through vox grills until mortal defenders froze long enough to die. The Emperor's children came in splendor fouled beyond sanity. Their armor flashed with color beneath ash and fire, their weapons singing murder into the air. Sonic shrieks rolled over the battlefield, turning organs to jelly and shattering teeth inside clenched mouths. Men collapsed with blood pouring from ears, eyes, and noses. Some stood laughing as their bones broke inside them. The Third Legion killed as if atrocity were an art they had grown bored of mastering. Iron warriors landed behind curtain barrages and shielded siege crawlers. They moved with grinding order, establishing gun positions before the dust of their arrival had settled. Heavy armor rolled from assault carriers. Breacher cohorts advanced behind slab shields. Macro drills, earthbreakers, and mobile artillery crawled into position like iron beetles. They did not waste fury. They built death. With them came the dark mechanicum. Their engines walked on too many legs. Their gun mounts wept oil that steamed where it touched the ground. Siege automata carried faces stretched across metal frames, some still moving, some still praying. Scrap code rode ahead of them in the Vox, turning commands into screams and devotional cant into blasphemous laughter. Cult hordes followed in their wake, shaven-headed fanatics, chain-ganged penitents turned traitor, mutant auxilia with swollen limbs and iron masks, oathbreakers carrying icons made from human bone. Behind some of them came things that had never been born, shapes in the smoke, limbs where limbs should not be, horns, mouths, claws, laughter, hunger. The never-born pressed against the world and found the cracks widening. The first trenches held. They were not meant to survive. They were meant to delay. Imperial army regiments stood in lines that commanders knew would become graves before the hour ended. Lasguns fired until barrels glowed cherry red. Autocannons hammered from sandbagged nests. Heavy bolters churned traitor infantry into chunks of meat and ceramite. Mortars thudded behind the lines, sending shells into enemy concentrations with mechanical persistence. Lehman Russ squadrons rolled through the smoke, battle cannons booming, hull-mounted lascannons stabbing at corrupted armor. One tank crushed a knot of cultists beneath its tracks, their bodies bursting wetly under its weight, then died when an Iron Warrior's lascannon punched through its turret ring and cooked the crew inside. The hatches blew open. Flame vomited out, carrying blackened hands and fragments of men who had been shouting prayers seconds before. A colonel of the Byzant Janizars held a trench section for 18 minutes longer than projected. Dorn noticed. "Reinforce them?" asked Archimus. "No. They are exceeding expectation. That is why the enemy is fixed." On the hololith, Dorn moved artillery markers behind the trench. Not men, guns. The regiment would hold because it was already dying efficiently. Sending more bodies into the same maw would not improve the geometry. A Vox channel burst open with choking static. "Command, this is Redoubt Callimachus. Death Guard elements entering the civilian retreat corridor. Loyal militia still falling back through the lower road. Request delay on denial protocols. Repeat, request delay. Our own are still in the approach." Dorn looked at the toxic plume spreading across the map. The Death Guard had chosen well. If they took the corridor clean, they would have a protected route toward the secondary gates. "Chemical denial protocols authorized." The reply came back ragged. "My lord, there are militia and labor columns in the corridor." "Yes. Phosphex and rad saturation will kill them. It will also deny the route." "My lord, they are loyal." Dorn's voice did not rise. The Death Guard must not be given clean corridors into the palace. For a heartbeat, only static answered. Then the order was obeyed. Green fire crawled through the lower road. Phosphex took to stone, flesh and armor with equal hunger, burning in clinging streams that could not be beaten out. Men ran aflame, screaming through rebreathers, clawing at their own gear as if they could tear away pain. Rad shells burst in the smoke, silent and invisible, turning breath into poison and marrow into future death. Loyal militia, civilians pressed into labor, retreating gunners and Death Guard advance elements vanished together behind a curtain of chemical light. The corridor was denied. Dawn marked it sealed. Sanguinius came to him while the palace trembled. The angel carried the war's light with him even here, beneath stone and shield and sorrow. His armor was gold, but not like ornament, like dawn remembered by men born underground. His wings were folded close, their feathers dusted with ash. Blood darkened one gauntlet, though whether it was his own or another's no one asked. Men in the chamber straightened when they saw him. Some wept without sound. Some found breath they had forgotten they possessed. Dawn did not bow. Sanguinius did not require it. "Brother," the angel said. "Sanguinius." The Primarch of the Blood Angels looked into the hololith and saw what Dawn had done. The sealed corridors, the abandoned lines, the chemical scars, the pale civilian routes turned black. "You are killing hope," Sanguinius said softly. "I am killing access. They need to see that we still defend them. They need the palace to stand. They are not stone, Rogal. They are men. They will break if all they are given is abandonment. Then stand where they can see you." Sanguinius studied him. There was no accusation in his gaze, only grief sharpened by understanding. "And you?" "I will stand where their deaths matter." The angel looked away first, not in defeat, but because another explosion rolled across the hololith and turned a defensive sector red. His presence filled the room with something close to faith. Dawn's presence stripped faith down to function. Together they were what Terra had left, one to make men willing to die, the other to decide where dying would purchase time. Above the palace, defense lasers awoke in full wrath. The traitor landing mass came through a gap torn by sacrifice in the outer fire patterns. Dozens of heavy landers descended beneath escort craft, their bellies pregnant with armor, siege engines and troop formations. Behind them, Auspec's ghosts suggested Titan transport cradles. If they reached the surface intact, an entire front would buckle before it had properly formed. Dawn gave the order before the request reached him. The palace fired. Defense lasers rose from hidden bastions, tower spines and buried gun vaults, beams so bright they turned the falling ash into a field of diamonds. The first lander vanished, its hull cut through from prow to engine. The second detonated when its reactor stack cooked off, taking 3 escorts with it. The third tried to bank and was speared through the belly, spilling burning tanks and armored bodies into the storm. One Titan cradle was struck amidships. Its void shields flared, failed, and the machine it carried died before setting foot upon Terra. A god engine, still chained in its descent harness, fell as a burning corpse. For one savage moment, the loyalists cheered. Then the wreckage came down. A lander the size of a fortress smashed into the outer trench network, still burning, still loaded with fuel and ammunition. The impact erased 3 lines of defenders. Trenches collapsed under molten debris. Lehman Russ tanks were flipped like toys and crushed beneath falling armor plates. Men trapped under the wreck screamed until secondary explosions turned screams into pressure and pressure into silence. Another fragment scythed through a heavy bolter company, reducing bodies to torn red mist and scattering their weapons like broken relics. The dying Titan cradle struck beyond the first line and plowed through an artillery park, dragging fire behind it, smashing guns, crews, ammunition haulers, and medici stations into one continuous wound across the earth. The landing mass was destroyed. The loyal trenches beneath it were gone. Dawn watched the casualty projections update. "Successful interception," said Archimus. "Yes," Dawn said. The hololith flickered. A new icon appeared at the edge of the firestorm. At first, some in the chamber thought it was an error. The rune was too violent, too distorted by heat, warp, pressure, and motion. It advanced through bombardment that should have slowed any living thing. It crossed impact zones where armor boiled and men became shadows. It moved with no concern for artillery, no regard for formation, no need for permission from the laws of war. Then the image resolved, a shape of wings and chains, horns against flame, axes like butcher moons, rage made flesh, a Primarch no longer contained by anything as frail as brotherhood. Angron. The strategium went silent, not disciplined silence, not the respectful quiet given to command, a deeper thing, a mortal failure of breath. Hardened generals, void officers, artillery masters, mechanicum liaisons, and men who had watched cities erased, all stopped speaking as the red icon advanced toward the palace lines. Sanguinius closed his eyes for the length of one heartbeat. Dorn did not. He leaned over the hololith and began moving guns. The ground assault came as a tide of mankind's discarded souls. They advanced beneath the burning sky in numbers too vast for courage and too filthy for glory. They came through ash storms and falling embers, over fields where orbital bombardment had boiled the topsoil into black glass, through craters still glowing from lance fire. They came screaming, chanting, weeping, laughing, crawling, limping, running until their lungs tore open. Some wore fragments of Imperial uniforms turned inside out and daubed with blasphemous sigils. Some had flayed the aquila from their own breastplates and nailed strips of skin over the wound. Some were naked, but for chains and devotional scars cut deep enough to show yellow fat beneath. Some were beastmen with horned skulls and wet muzzles, dragging rusted axes and butcher hooks. Some were mutants swollen by warp touch, their limbs uneven, their mouths crowded with teeth, their bellies split by parasitic growths that sang in childish voices. Behind them came chain gangs shackled together wrist to throat, driven forward by overseers with shock mauls and barbed whips. Pilgrims who had once crossed the stars to kneel before Terra's walls now staggered toward those same walls with their eyes burned out and the names of the War Master carved across their brows. Oathbreakers marched with stolen banners. Traitor auxilia advanced in armored ranks where discipline still survived beneath treachery. Men who had once served the Imperium now fired Imperial weapons at Imperial trenches and screamed that they had been freed. There were too many to hate individually. The palace guns had no such weakness. From the forward command trench, General Orlant watched the enemy horde enter the killing basin and felt his bowels loosen despite the stims in his blood. His regiment had held 3 outer trench lines since dawn, or what passed for dawn beneath the smoke. The men around him were grey with dust and red with other men's blood. Their laser guns rested on firing ledges, slick with condensation and gore. Autocannon teams waited behind shields made from torn hab plating. Heavy bolters squatted in their nests like iron beasts, their ammunition feeds tended by sweating loaders whose hands shook too badly to pray. The killing basin ahead had once been an administrative plaza for palace labor guilds. Its tiled floor was gone, replaced by churned mud, razor wire, tank traps, and concealed pressure mines. The buildings around it had been gutted, their windows filled with multi-lacer mounts, volkite culverins, missile teams, and massed las lines. Above and behind, macro batteries nested in the shattered shoulders of old ceremonial towers. Artillery grids waited further back, their barrels already elevated, their crews deafened by anticipation. The enemy filled the basin. They did not slow. They clambered over the first belts of wire and left parts of themselves hanging from the barbs. They tripped mines and vanished in fountains of dirt, meat, and steam. Others rushed through the gaps before the smoke cleared, slick with the remains of those who had died before them. Cultists with nail-studded clubs ran beside traitor soldiers carrying laslocks and grenade launchers. Beastmen leapt down into shell holes, tore apart wounded loyalists trapped there, and came out chewing. Mutants with iron cages bolted around their skulls staggered onward, despite taking lasfire through the chest. Some were already dead, their bodies animated by spite and the stink of the warp. Orlant swallowed bile. "Range?" "Optimal, Lord General," said the artillery savant beside him. "Hold." The word had not come from Orlant. It came through the command vox in a voice that belonged to stone. Rogal Dorn watched the same basin from the strategium beneath Barb Bastion. The hololithic projection rendered the horde as a crawling red flood. The loyalist lines glowed in gold, fragile but properly placed. He had drawn these basins himself. He had studied how panicked masses moved when driven by terror, rage, and bombardment. He had placed obstructions to compress them. He had left gaps to invite them deeper. He had ordered the forward trenches to fire just enough to provoke momentum and not enough to disperse it. The enemy believed they were advancing. Dorn saw them being poured. "Stand by," he said. Around him, officers repeated the command down 100 channels. Across the front, men gripped triggers and bit down on fear. Heavy bolter crews leaned into their weapons. Mortar teams bent over shells. Lehman Russ commanders waited in turret hatches behind revetments, faces hidden by goggles and soot. Imperial fists stood among mortal soldiers like statues of execution, bolters held low, helms turning with slow precision. The horde reached the center of the basin. Dorn lifted one gauntleted hand. "Commence." The basin ceased to be ground and became machinery. Macro batteries fired first. The impacts landed in the rear of the horde, closing escape with walls of flame and pulverized bodies. Then the multilasers opened from the flanking ruins, beams stitching through packed flesh with surgical brightness. Men burst apart where the beams touched them. Beastmen folded over severed spines. Mutants caught fire from the inside and ran until their organs spilled through their mouths. Volkite weapons added their own ancient cruelty, rays of killing heat that made bodies convulse, swell and detonate in clouds of burning blood. The massed las lines followed, thousands of rifles firing in disciplined volleys. Red light washed the basin. The front ranks dissolved. Then the bolters spoke. Astartes' shells did not kill cleanly. They entered bodies and became explosions. Cultists flew apart in wet chunks. Traitor auxilia were punched from their feet, torsos opening like ruptured sacks. A beastman took a bolt through the jaw and lost the top of its head in a spray of teeth, brains, and black horn fragments. The heavy bolters turned crowds into drifting red vapor. Limbs spun through smoke. Ribs clattered against firing steps. Heads bounced in the mud with eyes still blinking. The first enemy wave disappeared beneath firepower. The second climbed over it. Orlant shouted until his throat tore. He did not know what orders he gave. It did not matter. The gun lines knew their work. Load, fire, cool, shift, fire again. Men hauled ammunition crates over ground slippery with blood. Promethium gutters ignited along the trench fronts, catching corpse fat and spreading greasy orange fire over the mud. The smell came in layers: burning hair, cooked meat, open bowels, ozone, propellant, chemical rot from the Death Guard further east, fear sweat trapped inside flak armor. A Lehman Russ squadron rolled forward to seal a breach forming near the left embankment. Their battle cannons fired point blank into the press, each shell opening a crater packed with shredded bodies. Tank treads churned limbs into mud. Men slipped beneath the tracks and came out as red paste squeezed into the ruts. One mutant, too huge to die quickly, clung to a tank's hull with 3 arms, while the sponson heavy bolter chewed away its abdomen. It kept crawling until the tank commander leaned from the hatch and put a bolt pistol round through its eye. Still, they came. That was the first truth of Horus's ground war. Not that the lost and the damned were strong, not that they were brave. They were ammunition. Warm bodies loaded into the guns of the palace until barrels overheated, Ammunition ran low, crews went mad, and the defenders' calculations began to degrade beneath the weight of killing. The traitors fed the guns with lives they did not value. Behind the horde, beyond the smoke, Iron Warriors surveyors measured response times, firing arcs, reload patterns, and shield fluctuations. Every corpse taught Perturabo where the wall breathed. Dorn knew it. He allowed it. "General Orlant requests reserves," said a Vox officer. "His left embankment is under renewed pressure. He reports ammunition depletion in 3 heavy nests and casualties above projected threshold." Dorn examined the basin. Orlant's line bent, but had not broken. "Denied. My lord, he warns collapse may occur within minutes. Send ammunition servitors and 1 platoon of breachers to his right rear, not his left." The officer hesitated. His left is failing. His right must not. The order passed. Another voice rose. "Redoubt Thessal reports enemy penetration. World Eaters among the chain mobs. They request immediate reinforcement." "How many?" "Unclear. Vox traffic degraded. They are transmitting hand sign through picked feed. They claim 3 companies of mortal infantry remain combat capable." Dorn watched the rune flicker. "Send 2 squads. 2 squads, Lord?" "Yes." "Of the 7th? "No. Solar Auxilia. Flamers and Meltigans. Their task is to prevent immediate collapse, not reverse penetration." The officer bowed over his console. "By your will." Archimus stood nearby, silent until the order was sealed. "The redoubt will fall." "Yes. You are preserving the adjoining artillery rather than the men." "I am preserving the battle." The Huskarl accepted that. A son of Dorn knew the difference between cruelty and waste. He also knew his father rarely wasted anything. Near the sanctum routes, where access arteries descended toward the inner palace and the unseen road to the Emperor's presence, gold entered the slaughter. The custodes did not arrive as reinforcements. They came as verdicts. A breach had opened where mutant mobs, traitor sappers, and warp-touched infantry had forced their way through a lower transit arch. The mortal defenders there were already dead or dying. Some had been torn apart and nailed to the walls with their own bayonets. Others had simply gone insane, clawing at their eyes as things with too many hands whispered from the smoke. Then the 10,000 struck. They moved in disciplined silence, Auramite armor bright beneath ashfall, guardian spears cutting through smoke and flesh with the same contempt. One custodian drove his spear through a beastman's sternum, fired the weapon's built-in bolter, and blew the creature apart from within. Another took the charge of 3 Oathbreaker Ogryns and killed them in a sequence too swift for mortal eyes. A spear cut one throat, reversed into a knee, rose through a jaw, fired, turned, and opened a 3rd skull from brow to spine. They did not shout. They did not hold ground for honor. They killed everything within the breach corridor, placed melter charges along the compromised arch supports, and withdrew before the smoke had cleared. The arch collapsed behind them, crushing wounded loyalists and traitors alike under tons of sanctified stone. A mortal captain watching from the adjoining barricade began to cheer. A custodian turned his helm toward him. The cheer died in the man's mouth. They were not saviors. They were the Emperor's personal guardians, and their violence existed only where the inner approaches required it. They did not spend themselves on battlefield mercy. They preserved the master of mankind. Elsewhere, Sigismund moved along the western trenches as the killing continued. He passed men kneeling in the muck between volleys, hands clasped around Aquila pendants, whispering not to the Emperor as commander, not to the Emperor as sovereign, but to the Emperor as God. Their lips moved around desperate titles that had no place in the imperial truth. Lord of Light, Divine Father, Savior enthroned. Some pressed bloody fingers to their brows. Some begged forgiveness before rising to fire again. One old sergeant, his left arm gone below the elbow, touched his stump to the imperial eagle on his breastplate and smiled through blood-black teeth. "He sees," the sergeant whispered. "He sees us." Sigismund heard him. He said nothing. His silence grew darker inside his helm. He watched the men return to their firing ledges, watched them die with the Emperor's name in their mouths, and something in him hardened in approval. Not because they were correct by doctrine, because they did not break. Their belief made them stand amid horror that reason could not endure. From Barb Bastion, Dorn watched Sigismund's picked feed for several seconds longer than necessary. "Your first captain is steady," said one of the command staff. "No," Dorn said. "He is changing." "Into what, Lord?" Dorn did not answer at once. On the feed, Sigismund strode through corpse smoke, black and yellow armor streaked with gore, sword still sheathed because his orders had not released him. "Into something useful," Dorn said at last, "if contained." The assault intensified before midday, though the sky remained too black for hours to matter. World Eaters broke into 3 forward bastions along the southern approaches. They did not capture them so much as infest them with murder. Vox channels filled with screams, chain axe roar, and the wet percussion of bodies being torn open in confined spaces. Bastion Gathalamor reported melee inside the ammunition vaults. Bastion Aureus reported enemy on every level. Bastion Cord sent no report at all, only an open channel through which someone laughed until his throat was cut. Dorn listened to the reports and moved his hand across the hololith. Order withdrawal from Gathalamor and Aureus. All combat-capable personnel to fall back through tunnels Ash 7 and Ash 9. Wounded are to be left with charges armed. The chamber stilled. Archimus looked at the map. "Lord, some wounded are still transmitting. They cannot be moved before breach completion." A Vox officer's face had gone bloodless. "My lord, their identifiers are loyal. Many are Imperial fists." "I know. Shall I relay final rights?" "No. Relay detonation authority to the Bastion engines. Withdraw those who can still walk. Seal all internal shutters behind them." The orders went out. In Bastion Gathalamor, an Imperial fist with both legs severed dragged himself across a floor slick with World Eater blood and his own. His helm was cracked. One eye lens was dark. He saw the shutters begin to close and understood. Around him, wounded mortals sobbed or cursed or prayed. A World Eater smashed against the far door, chain axe shrieking, trying to force entry before the blast. The Imperial fist propped himself against a crate of crack missiles and reloaded his bolt pistol with one shaking hand. "Hold in his name," he voxed. No answer came. The charges detonated. Bastion Gathalamor rose in a pillar of stone, fire, ceramite, and shredded flesh. Bastion Aureus followed moments later, its upper guns collapsing into its lower chambers as the internal magazines cooked off. Bastion Cord burned without signal, consumed by its own reserve promethium. The southern front became a wall of dust and flame. World Eaters died roaring. Loyal wounded died beneath the same command. The line held, for a time. By the end of that phase of slaughter, the first true palace wall was no longer gold, grey or black. It was stained black-red from foundation to gunline. Blood had dried in sheets across its lower bastions. Corpse matter clung to firing slits. Limbs hung from razor wire in such density that fresh bodies could not fall cleanly. The ground before it was no longer ground. It was a mountain range of dead, built from cultists, mutants, traitor soldiers, loyal soldiers, beasts, broken machines, torn banners and bodies burned into one another by promethium. Tanks could not cross without climbing the slain. Men could not walk without sinking to the knee in meat. And still the traitors advanced over their own dead, not because they believed they could live, because Perturabo had not yet finished learning. The intrusion entered the command grid as a line of cold mathematics. No scream preceded it, no scrap code laughter, no demonic distortion. The signal cut through degraded Vox traffic with obscene clarity, bypassing lesser wards, touching the palace command architecture for less than a breath before the Mechanicum adepts slammed containment shutters down around it. In that breath, the hololith flickered. The red enemy flood vanished. The walls became stress diagrams. The trenches became equations. The dead became pressure values. Ammunition expenditure became rhythm. Reinforcement delays became proof. Then a single phrase appeared in high Gothic across the projection. Your wall exhales. The chamber became silent. Dorn stared at the phrase until it vanished under layers of counter-intrusion rights and static. Around him, adepts bled from their neural sockets as they purged the contact. Officers looked to their Primarch and found no anger on his face, no fear, no surprise, only recognition, not madness, not rage, not the ecstatic corruption of Fulgrim, the rot endurance of Mortarion, the berserker storm of Angron, or the god-drunk pride of Horus. This was siegecraft. This was a mind of iron measuring the palace by the language Dorn himself spoke best. Across the smoke-choked approaches, beyond the mountains of dead, Perturabo had touched the wall and felt it breathe. Dorn lowered his hand to the hololith and began closing the gap. Lionsgate Spaceport was not merely a place where ships came down. It was a throat. Through it, armies could be swallowed by terror or vomited into the palace war. Its landing fields sprawled across the fortified approaches like continents of adamantium, ferrocrete, and void-scorched steel. Its hangar cathedrals rose higher than hive spires, each nave large enough to shelter bulk landers, armor transports, orbital lifters, and the chained cradles of war engines. Its lift shafts descended into the palace's deep arteries. Its transit rails ran toward ammunition vaults, armor pools, medici warrens, and troop reserves. Its fuel reservoirs lay buried beneath armored hills. Its tower guns could rake the sky. Its void-hardened gates could admit entire regiments. If Horus took it intact, the War Master would no longer need to bleed his greatest engines through firestorms and broken descent corridors. He would land them properly. He would feed the siege with titans, siege automata, super-heavy armor, artillery trains, legion reserves, and enough mortal bodies to drown every wall. That was why Lion's Gate could not fall. That was also why Dorn knew it eventually would. Fafnir Ran stood upon the inner parapet of the gatehold and looked out over a field already packed with corpses. His armor was the yellow of the 7th Legion beneath layers of ash, oil, and blood. His helm hung. From his belt, its lenses cracked from a near miss that had taken the head from the mortal officer beside him less than an hour earlier. The blood from that death had dried along Rand's cheek in a black line. He had not wiped it away. Below him, shield walls locked into place across the killing avenues. Imperial fists breacher squads waited behind slabs of ceramite and adamantium, bolter's mag locked to their shields, chain blades and power axes ready for the moment the enemy came close enough to make ammunition less efficient than muscle. Lascanon nests sat in the upper gantries, their crews hard-wired into rangefinders and recoil thrones. Graviton mines slept beneath torn ferrocrete. Murder holes stared down into narrow corridors where the enemy would be invited to gather and die. Every gate had a second gate behind it. Every second gate had charges beneath it. Every corridor bent at angles chosen by men who understood how bodies broke when fire came from 3 sides at once. Ran liked it. Not because it was elegant. It was not. It was ugly, dense, brutal work. The kind of defense that admitted a truth few strategists enjoyed saying aloud. Eventually, the enemy would get inside. So the inside had been taught to kill. A vox crackled in his gorget. "Lord Ran," said a mortal artillery captain from somewhere below. "Enemy mass increasing before the primary approach. Infantry wave forming. Composition: cult levy, traitor auxilia, mutant stock, iron warrior's armor behind them." Ran smiled without humor. "Of course. They are using the humans as cover. They are using them as measurement." The captain did not answer. He probably did not understand. It did not matter. He would soon. Across the field, the first wave surged forward. It was not a charge in the way warriors charged. It was a shove. Thousands upon thousands of human bodies were driven toward Lion's Gate by fear, drugs, fanaticism, and the whips of those behind them. Cultists ran over wreckage and the limbs of men who had died in earlier assaults. Traitor auxilia advanced in loose blocks, firing as they moved, their discipline frayed by artillery and terror, but not yet broken. Mutants lumbered among them, some with iron collars bolted through their throats, others with crude armor plates nailed straight into swollen flesh. Chain gangs stumbled in lines, screaming as they were dragged over barbed wire by the momentum of those behind. Behind the human tide came the Iron Warriors. They advanced with grinding contempt. Their armor was iron and hazard stripe, dirtied by ash, marked by chevrons and siege scars. They did not hurry. They did not need to. Their mortal fodder absorbed the first fire. Behind that living screen rolled heavy armor, breacher carriers, siege rams, and artillery crawlers, their guns measuring the gatehold with patient malice. The 4th Legion did not waste hate. It processed hate into pressure. Kroger's icon moved among them. Rand saw it on the tactical feed and felt his blood warm. "Hold," he voxed. The first human ranks entered the outer fire zone. Last fire began from the lower walls, not enough to break them, only enough to keep them moving in the desired direction. Men died and fell, and those behind tripped on them. The mass tightened. Ran waited. Iron Warriors' guns began to fire over the heads of their fodder, shells slamming into the outer bastions. Stone and plasteel flew in jagged storms. A Lascanon nest vanished in a white detonation. The gun crew became steam and cooked bone inside the shielded aperture. "Hold," Rand said again. The traitor mass reached the second marker. "Now!" Lion's Gate opened its teeth. Heavy bolters roared from the lower embrasures, cutting the front ranks into blood mist. Multi-lacers stitched burning lines across the press. Mortars thumped from behind the walls, shells falling into the packed center of the horde and lifting bodies in wet fountains. Lascanons stabbed through the living screen to strike at Iron Warriors' armor, punching glowing holes through siege carriers and bursting engines into flame. Volkite beams flashed from upper murder galleries, making men swell and burst, their ruptured bodies setting fire to those pressed against them. The graviton mines woke. The ground folded. Whole blocks of attackers were dragged down as if invisible hands had seized their bones. Men collapsed into one another, armor crumpling, spines snapping, skulls imploding under sudden force. A mutant the size of an ogrin flattened into the mud with a sound like a butcher's hammer striking meat. The bodies above the minefield compacted into a twitching mound of broken limbs and armor shards. The wave behind them could not stop. It climbed the mound and became part of it. Ran watched the pressure pile form. "Left gate, cadres. Prepare advance." A captain beside him turned. "Outside the walls, Lord?" "Yes. The Iron Warriors are still behind the human screen. They will lose sight of us when the pile rises higher. They have made their own blindfold." The captain bared his teeth. "By your will." The sally gates opened. Imperial fists poured out in shield-locked ranks, breachers first, assault cadres behind them, mortal auxilia with flamers and melter charges in their wake. They did not charge for glory. They moved like a wall that had decided to walk. Their shields hit the flank of the compressed enemy mass with enough force to fold it inward. Bolters fired point blank. Chain blades came down. Power axes split men from collar to groin. Flamers washed the edges of the pressure pile, setting corpse fat alight until the mound burned with greasy orange flame. The enemy could not maneuver. There were too many of them. Ran had turned their abundance into obstruction. He led from the front, hammer in both hands, armor ringing beneath impacts. A traitor auxilia officer fired a plasma pistol at him. The shot scorched across Ran's pauldron, melting paint and ceramite. Ran crossed the distance and struck the man in the chest. The hammer did not merely break him, it opened him. Armor, ribs, lungs, and heart burst backward in a fan across the men behind him. Rand stepped through the spray and swung again, smashing a mutant skull down into its torso. An Iron Warrior breacher forced his way through the crush, shield raised, bolter firing from the notch. A shell detonated against Rand's breastplate and staggered him. The Iron Warrior pushed closer. "Wall dog," the traitor voxed. Rand slammed his hammer into the warrior's shield. The shield cracked. The second blow broke the arm behind it. The third drove the fractured shield into the Iron Warrior's helm and pulped the head within. Rand kicked the corpse back into the human mass. "Come closer," he growled across the open vox. "I have a wall for you." Behind the counter-advance, loyal armor swept the flanks. Lehman Russ tanks and Sikaran battle tanks rolled from covered ramps, their tracks grinding bodies flat as they angled fire into the exposed Iron Warriors' vehicles. Battle cannons boomed, autocannons hammered. A siege crawler burned, its crew crawling from hatches, only to be cut down by last fire. One loyal tank took a direct hit from a traitorless cannon and exploded, its turret leaping into the air, trailing fire and limbs. The tanks did not halt. The dead were already beneath them. In Barb Bastion, Dorn watched the counter-advance unfold through the hololith. The rune-marked Ran pushed outward, then folded back at the correct angle. Enemy bodies packed into the obstacle field. Iron Warrior's armor slowed to adjust firing lines. For several minutes, Lion's Gate gained what mattered most: time. "Bold," said Archimus. "Efficient," Dorn said. "You approve?" It converts enemy numbers into terrain obstruction. It reduces pressure on the primary gates and forces their armor to alter approach. Approval is irrelevant. Archimus inclined his head. "As you say, Lord." Dorn's gaze moved to the deeper tactical grid. The first wave had been broken, but the battle was widening. More enemy runes appeared along the lateral approaches. Sons of Horus assault elements, World Eaters shock formations, Iron Warriors heavy assets, shifting to support Kroger's push. The enemy was not trying one door. He was pressing the hinge, the frame, the floor beneath it, and the wall around it. Abaddon's marker appeared next. Dorn studied it without expression. Then came Khan. The World Eater's icon moved like a wound opening across the map. Lion's Gate descended into hell. Aircraft fell through the smoke in pieces, some loyal, some traitor, all of them burning. A stormbird with its wings shot away crashed through the roof of a hangar cathedral, smashing down among fuel shrines and parked transports. The explosion blew, stained armor glass from the nave windows, and hurled burning bodies across the loading platforms. A traitor lander came in too low beneath flak, clipped a defense tower, and spun into the eastern taxiway, crushing a tank company beneath its belly before detonating its fuel reserves. Men ran aflame between ammunition pallets. Servitors burned at their posts, still chanting loading protocols through melted vox grills. Inside the gatehold, Iron Warriors shells began finding the weak points. Not many. Enough. One void hardened gate buckled inward under concentrated melter charges and siege drill impacts. The first breach was sealed by Imperial fists, who fought in a corridor so narrow their shields scraped sparks from both walls. They held for 8 minutes. When they died standing, armor wedged together so tightly the traitors had to cut their bodies apart to pass. By then, the second gate was ready. Khan reached the western killing avenue with World Eaters around him. They came over the corpse piles howling, chain axes raised, armor painted red over white and blue, until Legion colors became irrelevant. They did not care for mines. They did not care for artillery. They threw themselves into fire with a joy that made mortal defenders lose bladder and breath. A heavy bolter crew cut down 5, then 10, then 20. Khan reached the nest anyway. He landed inside it like a shell. Gorechild roared. The first gunner became 2 pieces. The loader lost his head and one arm in the same stroke. The weapon itself was split apart, its barrel shrieking against the chain axe teeth before bursting under stress. Ran saw the western avenue begin to collapse. "Reserves to west." "Already committed," came the reply. "Then uncommit them from wherever they are breathing easier." Abaddon struck from the north under cover of orbital debris and smoke. The Sons of Horus came in hard, elite assault units, punching through ravaged defense grids, black and sea-green plate moving with brutal confidence. They were not fodder. They were the War Master's blade. They hit the withdrawal lanes, not the walls, killing the routes by which Lion's Gate could bleed without dying. Ran understood at once, and hated them for the intelligence of it. Kroger pushed again from the front. The Iron Warriors had finished measuring. Their artillery shifted from suppression to incision. Shells landed not across the walls, but into joints, relay towers, ammunition hoists, shield anchors, communication spines. Breacher units advanced behind portable mantlets, stepping over the mangled remains of the first waves. Human bodies had done their work. Now iron came to collect. Ran was at the inner gate when the shell struck. It hit the parapet above him and brought half a tower down across the defense platform. The blast threw him from his feet. His helm, still at his belt, was crushed flat beneath falling stone. His left pauldron split. Warning runes flooded his retinal display through his armor's internal feed. He rose into a rain of dust and blood and found one of his arms slow to answer him. A shard of blackened metal had punched through the armor at his side. He tore it out, and a dark sheet of blood followed. "Lord Ran," someone was saying. "Lord Ran, command link is compromised." He spat blood onto the floor. "Then shout." The gate shook again. A breacher captain staggered toward him. Multiple penetrations. West Avenue contested. North withdrawal lane under Sons of Horus assault. Front gate pressure increasing. World Eaters inside the tertiary kill corridor. We cannot hold all axes. Ran knew. Dorn had known before him. The retreat pattern was already written in sealed orders, locked in the gatehold engines. Ran had hated those orders when he first read them, not because they were wrong, but because they presumed defeat with the calm certainty of sunrise. "Begin pattern Dawn Red," Ran said. The captain stared for half a heartbeat, then nodded. "Dawn Red." Across Lion's Gate, Loyalist units began to withdraw by increments. Not flight, not rout. Collapse controlled by command. Gates sealed behind squads still firing. Lift shafts were slagged after the last assigned armor passed through. Ammunition stores were detonated before the enemy reached them. Fuel lines were flooded, then ignited. Transit rails twisted under melter charges. The spaceport wounded itself to deny full use of its body. Many did not escape. Ran saw a platoon of mortal auxilia trapped behind a closing blast door. Their captain understood before the men did. He saluted through the narrowing gap. Ran returned the salute. Then the door sealed, and the corridor behind it became a furnace as Prometheum denial charges fired. The screams came through the Vox for several seconds before the channel died. Sigismund arrived in blackened yellow like an execution order. He did not come with banners. He came with kill squads. Imperial fists in close assault panoply struck into the northern withdrawal lane where Sons of Horus officers were pressing too deep. Sigismund moved ahead of them, sword drawn, shieldless, utterly silent. A traitor champion stepped forward to meet him, power maul crackling, helm crowned with the Eye of Horus. "I claim your head for the War Master," the champion voxed. Sigismund cut off his weapon hand, opened his throat, and drove the blade through the eye lens before the body fell. "No," Sigismund said. He went on. He did not seek glory. He did not challenge the greatest warriors by name. He killed officers, vox-bearers, standard carriers, and squad leaders. He cut command from the enemy advance one throat at a time. Around him, the withdrawal stabilized. Loyalist wounded who could still crawl were dragged back. Those who could not were given grenades, pistols, or silence. Ran met him at the junction of two burning transit arteries. "You are late," Ran said. I am where I was ordered to be. That sounds like him. Sigismund glanced toward the outer fire. Can you walk? Ran laughed, then coughed blood. I can kill. That was not the question. No. Then you will be carried. I will not. Sigismund looked at him. There was no warmth in it, no insult either. You will. Dorn still has use for you. That ended the matter. Behind them, Titans were visible through the storm. Not landed yet, not fully. Their descent cradles moved above the burning horizon like cathedrals falling from heaven. Vast shapes walked within cloud and fire, half hidden by void shield glare and smoke. Gods waiting for permission to step onto the soil of Terra. The sight made men falter. Even Astartes looked once and measured the scale of the war still coming. In the strategium, Dorn issued the final denial plan. If Lion's Gate falls, it falls crippled, he said. Mine all primary transit arteries. Collapse lift systems after withdrawal of assigned units. Flood lower access tunnels with rad slurry. Convert cargo avenues into sequential kill boxes. Destroy unmovable armor. Poison fuel reservoirs. Rig hangar cathedrals for delayed ignition. No engine larger than a gunship is to depart that field intact without my command. No enemy Titan is to pass through its throat without paying in time. A Mechanicum Magos clicked a protest through a ruined vocal unit. Lord Praetorian, such actions will render much of the spaceport inoperable to loyal assets. Dorn turned his gaze upon the Magos. If Horus takes it, it is no longer a loyal asset. The Magos bowed, mechadendrites twitching. Acknowledged. On the hololith, Lion's Gate flickered from gold to contested amber, then to bleeding red along its outer structures. Fafnir Rand's icon moved inward under escort. Sigismund's blade shaped the retreat. Khan's marker raged in the west. Abaddon's pressure remained in the north. Kroger ground forward from the front. The gatehold still fought, but the spaceport's outer body was compromised. Then the Vox changed. Static cleared from a captured channel with unnatural precision. Not the shrieking blasphemy of demons, not the laughter of the Emperor's children, not the butcher roar of the World Eaters. This was colder, cleaner, a signal shaped like a blade laid across a drafting table. The chamber heard iron breathing through the Vox. Then Perturabo's message came. Your wall has learned its first truth. Dorn looked at Lion's Gate burning on the hololith. He did not answer. He began preparing the second truth. Dorn made the weakness visible. He did it by subtraction. Guns were withdrawn from the Saturnine approaches by night, not all at once, never enough to suggest panic, never enough to prove intent. Ammunition trains were diverted along routes the enemy could observe through stolen auger ghosts. Signal traffic thinned in, corridors where it had once been dense. Patrols became irregular. Shield harmonics were permitted to fluctuate by fractions that only a siege master would notice. Repair crews left sections of plating half-finished beneath the pretext of overextension. Dead Vox relays were allowed to remain dead. It was a lie built from real exhaustion. That made it convincing. The palace was bleeding everywhere. Lion's Gate had been compromised. The outer works were choked with corpses. The bombardment had shaken bastions from their roots and set fire to districts that had existed before the Imperium had a name. Everywhere, men begged for guns, for shells, for medici support, for reinforcements, for orders that did not end in abandonment. Dorn gave many of them nothing. He took from the Saturnine sector, where any lesser commander would have added strength, and the absence became bait. In the deep strategium, the hololith showed the Saturnine wall as a measured flaw in a continent of fire. Archimus stood at Dorn's shoulder, reading the deceit in silence. He had watched his Primarch build fortresses across worlds that no longer had skies. He had watched him shape walls as other warriors shaped blades. He knew enough to understand that a weak point chosen by Rogal Dorn was not weakness. It was a mouth waiting to close. They will see it, Archimus said. Yes. They will believe we are stretched beyond recovery. We are stretched beyond recovery. Archimus turned his helm slightly. Lord, that is why they will believe it. Dorn touched the hololith. Beneath the Saturnine sector, buried tunnels flared in ghost blue. Subterranean transit galleries, maintenance vanes, forgotten aqueduct channels, sealed archaeotech cavities and reinforcement voids appeared layer by layer, descending beneath the wall like roots beneath a dead tree. Some had been dug by Imperial hands. Some were older than Unity. Some had names in languages no living man could speak. Dorn had ordered them mapped, mined, listened to, and lied about. Signal discipline remains absolute, Dorn said. Archimus bowed. All participating units have been compartmentalized. No full pattern exists below Huskarl command. Good. Sigismund has requested forward assignment. Dorn's expression did not change. He has been given one. He will not like the leash. I did not ask him to like it. On the projection, Sigismund's assigned position appeared behind the Saturnine wall, not at the front of glory, not where his zeal might drag him into a duel before the trap matured, but where his violence could be released into a sealed killing zone at the correct moment. Dorn distrusted what had taken root in his first captain, but distrust did not prevent use. A flawed blade was still a blade if the hand gripping it was strong enough. Beyond the palace, the traitors watched. Perturabo saw geometry. He stood amid calculations, whether aboard a command bastion, a siege engine, or within the iron sanctum of his own mind, and he read the Saturnine sector as one reads a fracture in stone. The wall breathed differently there. The guns answered late. The reserves shifted away. The shield layers fluttered like weakened muscle. He did not think in hope. Hope was for the devout and the damned. He thought in load, pressure, time, and breach potential. The flaw was there. Its usefulness did not require trust. It required testing. Fulgrim saw spectacle. The Phoenician beheld the thinning guns and imagined ascension through color, scream, and blade. A wall thought secure would be made into a stage. The defenders would be taught the beauty of ruin. The Emperor's children would climb under a sky of burning chemicals and make of Saturnine a performance so exquisite that even the dead would envy those butchered there. Fulgrim did not see a line of pressure. He saw an audience. Abaddon saw destiny. The first captain of the Sons of Horus looked upon the same weakness and felt the gravity of history leaning toward him. The palace had to be entered. The Emperor's sanctuary had to be violated. Some name would be spoken in the aftermath of that first true penetration, and Abaddon meant it to be his. Around him, the Justarian prepared their war plate, black Terminator armor blessed in treason, combi bolters fed, power fists checked, blades oiled, trophies chained. Elite assault companies waited with them, warriors who had killed under the eye of Horus since the Great Crusade and now sought to carve their way into the Father's house. Dawn allowed them all to be correct enough to advance. Beneath Saturnine, men listened in the dark. Palace engineers crouched in tunnels, sealed behind layers of adamantium and rockcrete, their faces hidden behind rebreathers, their hands wrapped around Auspex rigs and seismic listening rods. Around them, the buried world groaned. Dust fell in slow veils from the ceiling. Pipes sweated black water. Old machines clicked behind walls, responding to no command anyone had given in 10,000 years. Every sound was magnified. A dropped tool became a gunshot. A man's breathing became a beast in the dark. Then came the scraping. It began as a tremor beneath thought, a pressure in the teeth. The engineers looked at one another through lens and gloom. The Auspex returns shivered, blurred, cleared and returned ghost echoes where there should have been stone. Something was moving through the substrata. Not one thing, many. Drill heads, siege claws, melter cutters, armored bodies forcing passages through dead earth. One engineer whispered a prayer he had been told not to speak. A huscarl standing beside him placed a gauntleted hand on his shoulder. Not comfort, warning. The engineer closed his mouth and listened. In chambers above and around the buried approach, gun crews waited in sealed darkness. Imperial fists knelt behind blast shutters with bolters ready. Solar auxilia crouched beside flamer tanks. The nozzles of their weapons pointed at doors that had not yet opened. Breacher companies stood shield to shield in galleries too narrow for retreat. Volkite batteries rested in recessed alcoves, their ancient coils warming with a low, hungry hum. Teleport beacons slept behind rune-locked casings. Collapse charges lay buried in the walls, floors and ceilings, layered so that one detonation would herd, another would maim, and the final sequence would bury what remained. No man there had been told the full shape of the trap. They had been given their order: do not fire until commanded. So they waited while the enemy came closer. The first loyal sappers died in Tunnel Ash 9. They had been left there because the enemy needed to believe the lower approaches were still defended by desperate men rather than abandoned to design. The sappers fought in darkness under red lumen strips, mining charges and shotguns, and lascutters turned into weapons. The first sons of Horus through the breach killed them with professional brutality. Bolters thundered in the enclosed space, each detonation turning bodies into bursts of red against the stone. One sapper tried to trigger his charge manually after his legs were severed. A Justarin crushed his hand under a Terminator boot and fired into his face. Their death cries reached the command feed. Dorn listened. "Enemy vanguard committed," said Archimus. "Not enough." The second tunnel fell, then the third. More loyal men died where Dorn had placed them, their lives serving as proof that the path was real, contested, valuable. A junior commander in the Saturnine subgrid asked for permission to seal the first breach and ignite the forward charges. Dorn denied him. "My lord," the commander voxed, voice strained by the sound of slaughter behind him. "We still have men alive in the forward galleries." "Yes. If we wait, they will be overrun. They are overrun now. My lord, the Justarin are not yet fully inside. That is why you will wait." The channel remained open for several seconds. Screams filled it. A bolter fired once, twice, then cut off in a wet burst of static. The commander answered at last. "By your will." Dorn did not close his eyes. He did not lower his head. He did not honor the men by pretending the decision had been difficult enough to deserve ceremony. Surgical cruelty had no need of drama. The knife cut because cutting was required. The sons of Horus came on. They forced their way into the substrata beneath Saturnine, black-armored elites advancing through dust and blood. Justarin Terminators led, massive in their plate, their armor scraping walls never built for such bulk. Behind them came assault companies with breaching charges, melter weapons, chain blades, flamers, and the hard confidence of warriors who believed they had outplayed the Praetorian. Their vox traffic was disciplined. Their pace was aggressive but not reckless. They marked junctions. They secured chambers. They killed survivors. They pushed toward the eruption points that would spill them inside the palace defense web. Abaddon moved with them like an oath given flesh. He saw the path opening. He saw the future narrowing to a point sharp enough to draw blood from eternity. The palace above them thundered under bombardment. The wall waited. The Emperor waited beyond walls beyond walls. Abaddon's hearts beat with wrath and purpose. Then the tunnels behind him died. Dorn closed his hand. The first collapse charges fired in sequence. Not all at once. Never all at once. The rear galleries folded inward with the force of mountains deciding to kneel. Ferrocrete slabs came down on Sons of Horus squads, crushing power armor, bodies and weapons into compacted ruin. Terminator plate that had turned aside Lascannons buckled under falling mass. Men vanished beneath stone with vox bursts cut into single syllables. The second charges detonated along the flanks. Walls opened. Breacher companies emerged from darkness. Imperial fists fired at point-blank range. bolters roaring into the packed traitor columns. Bolt shells detonated against black plate, blew out knees, opened torsos, shattered helms, threw severed arms into the dust. Flamers washed corridors in burning promethium, liquid fire crawling over armor seals, pouring through rent joints, cooking the warriors inside their plate. Volkite beams stabbed from alcoves and made ceramite glow before flesh within burst from heat shock. The underworld became a slaughterhouse. A Justarin tried to turn his combi bolter toward a newly opened murder slit. A power fist came through the darkness beside him, gripped his helm, and crushed it inward until the lenses burst and brain matter squeezed through the broken grille. Another fired into a flamer team, killing 2 auxilia in sprays of blood and burning fuel, only to be struck by a graviton pulse that drove him to his knees. The ceiling came down upon him a breath later. His armor flattened with him inside it. Traitor warriors fought back with the ferocity of the damned. They were not cattle. They were the sons of Horus, and even trapped they killed. Imperial fists fell with throats torn open by chain blades. Breacher shields cracked under power fists. Flamers exploded, turning loyal and traitor alike into thrashing candles. A Huskarl took a Justarin blade through the abdomen, locked his arms around the traitor, and triggered the melter charge at his belt. Both vanished in a white bloom that left only molten armor fused to the floor. Abaddon realized the shape of the trap as it closed around him. Not a breach, a tomb. Above, the Emperor's children came against the Saturnine wall. They arrived in colors that mocked the ash-dark world. Purple, gold, ivory, lacquered black, flayed pink, armor polished where it was not streaked with gore. Their banners streamed beneath bombardment winds. Their sonic engines shrieked hymns that broke glass, split teeth, and sent mortal defenders vomiting blood into their masks. Noise weapons opened with waves of invisible force, pulping organs inside armor, shaking men from parapets, turning disciplined gun crews into spasming meat. Fulgrim made the assault beautiful only to himself. His warriors climbed, leapt, and danced through fire lanes where sane soldiers would have crawled. They cut apart wounded men for the pleasure of motion. They carved faces from corpses and wore them wet over their helms. They sang as they died. They laughed when bolters tore them open. Speed carried them through curtains of last fire. Excess carried them into artillery blasts. Mutilation became their language. Every death, theirs or another's, was folded into the performance. The Saturnine wall answered with restraint until restraint was no longer needed. Hidden guns opened. Heavy bolters tore elegant warriors into red fragments. Plasma culverins burned charging squads into silhouettes of ash. Mortars dropped into the packed masses forming beneath the wall, blasting open craters full of broken purple armor and ruined limbs. Yet the Emperor's children kept coming. They wanted the wall. They wanted the moment. They wanted eyes upon them. Sigismund waited behind the inner parapet, surrounded by warriors who could feel the battle through the soles of their boots. His sword was drawn. Its edge held the dim light without, reflecting it. Around him, Imperial fists stood ready in silence, while beyond the shuttered gate, the Third Legion screamed, sang, and murdered its way closer. He had heard the men praying again. Not here, not in this place of stone and command, but below, in the routes he had crossed to reach his assigned post. Mortal soldiers whispering to the Emperor as Divine Father. Wounded gunners begging the Master of Mankind to see them. Men kissing Aquilus before returning to guns that would almost certainly become their graves. Their faith had not made them weak. It had made them immovable for a few more breaths. Dorn mistrusted it. Sigismund was no longer certain Dorn was right to. The Vox rune blinked in his helm. He did not speak first. "Sigismund," Dorn said, "my lord, prepare to advance. At last." A pause, cold enough to be rebuke. "You will advance on my mark. You will kill command elements and break the assault's momentum. You will not pursue Fulgrim. You will not answer challenge unless I command it. You will not mistake wrath for purpose." Sigismund's grip tightened on the sword. "I hear and obey." "You will do more than hear." "I obey." The link ended. The Saturnine wall shook as another sonic barrage rolled across it. Men died screaming without wounds. Others bled from eyes and ears and stayed at their guns. Below, the Emperor's children massed in killing splendor. Beneath the wall, the sons of Horus died in darkness, their elite crushed, burned and torn apart by a trap built from patience and the corpses of loyal men. Then, the inner gate opened. Rogal Dorn stepped onto the Saturnine wall. He did not emerge like a savior. No light crowned him. No angels sang. No banner needed to rise above him. He came in warplate dusted with the powdered bones of the palace, a storm shield locked to one arm, his chain blade and killing purpose carried with the silence of an execution chamber. Where Fulgrim made war into theatre, Dorn made it into sentence. The defenders saw him and straightened. The traitors saw him and screamed louder.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support really helps.
Dorn looked across the wall, across the bodies, across the radiant madness of the Third Legion. He looked once to Sigismund, the flawed blade, the faithful weapon, the son he distrusted and required. "Now," he said. The Saturnine wall became a mouth of thunder. The Emperor's children climbed through fire as if fire were applause. They came in gleaming colors fouled by ash, in lacquered plate and flayed silk, with helms sculpted into screaming faces and pauldrons crusted in jewels, bone, teeth, and wet trophies cut from men who had died moments before. They scaled the dead piled against the wall, boots sinking into the ruptured bodies of cultists, legionaries, auxilia, and their own brothers. Some laughed as they climbed. Some sang hymns of violation through vox grills tuned to make mortal ears bleed. Some moved with swords outstretched, inviting gunfire as if every shell that struck them were a lover's hand. The wall answered with discipline. Imperial fists fired by order, not fear. Heavy bolters hammered from bastion mouths, their recoil shaking entire weapon nests. Bolter rounds punched into the Emperor's children and detonated, bursting ornate armor outward in showers of ceramite, blood, and shredded organs. Lascannons burned white scars through the assault ladders and climbing engines. Plasma guns hissed and spat miniature suns into the press. Men of the solar auxilia died at their stations, blood pouring from ears and eyes as sonic weapons rolled over the parapets and turned thought into agony. The noise was a weapon before it was a sound. It came in shrieking harmonics, in basso pulses that made bones ache, in needle-thin screams that split vision into shards. Mortal soldiers dropped with no wound upon them, their organs reduced to slurry inside their armor. One gun crew remained standing for several seconds after death, hands still gripping their weapon, their bodies held upright by the pressure of men behind them. Then their joints softened. They collapsed like sacks of blood. Another auxilia trooper tried to fire his las rifle and vomited pieces of his lungs into his respirator. The man clawed at his mask until his fingers broke, then died kneeling, hands folded as if in prayer. The Imperial fists did not kneel. They locked formation along the wall walk and the inner firing tiers, shields braced, bolters. Firing, helms turning in perfect increments. Sensory assault battered against their armor. Warning runes strobed crimson. Autosenses screamed distortion. Balance systems fought against sonic vibration. Teeth cracked inside sealed helms. Blood ran from the noses of warriors bred to endure poisons, vacuum and pain. Still they held. Stone might crack. The sons of Dorn did not yield until ordered. Sigismund moved among them as a black-edged shape amid yellow and grey. His sword rose and fell without waste. He killed an emperor's child as the traitor vaulted the parapet, cutting through the warrior's throat seal before his feet touched stone. The corpse spun backward, head half severed, blood fanning across those climbing behind him. Another came laughing with paired blades shimmering with disruptor fields. Sigismund caught the first blow on his vambrace, let the second slide past his helm, and drove his sword into the traitor's abdomen. He twisted, ripped upward, and opened the warrior from belly to sternum. The Emperor's child tried to laugh through the flood of his own viscera. Sigismund broke his jaw with the pommel and kicked him from the wall. More came. They always came. A champion in ivory and violet armor landed before him, helm crowned with a crest of human fingers wired into a fan. The warrior's blade screamed as it moved, the edge vibrating with a frequency that made the air bleed. He struck with the grace of a duelist and the hunger of a butcher. Sigismund met him head-on. Sword rang against shriek blade. Sparks burst. The wall shook beneath them as artillery detonated somewhere below. "You are solemn for a corpse," the traitor voxed. Sigismund drove him back 2 steps. "You are loud for one." The champion laughed, then attacked faster. Sigismund parried, stepped in, and punched his fist into the traitor's helm. The blow cracked the faceplate. A second stroke removed the warrior's sword arm. The third opened him across the chest and spilled bright blood across Sigismund's armor. The first captain did not watch him fall. He had already turned to the next enemy. For a time, he was enough. Then Fulgrim came. The Phoenician entered the killing field as though the war had been arranged for his arrival. He came through smoke and gunfire with unnatural radiance, impossibly tall, impossibly beautiful, impossibly wrong. His armor shimmered with colors no sane eye wished to name. His limbs moved with liquid arrogance. Wings of sensation seemed to unfurl around him, though no feather touched the air. Every step was a mockery of the ground. Every gesture invited witness. Around him, loyalists died without being struck, their bodies failing under the pressure of his presence, their minds splitting beneath the splendor of corruption. The Emperor's children howled his name. The defenders fired. Bolter rounds struck him and burst. The wounds they made closed beneath curling flesh and laughing light. Lascanon fire scorched his armor and did not slow him. A plasma bolt struck his side, burning through gilded plate, exposing something wet and luminous beneath. Fulgrim turned his head toward the gunner, smiled, and the man began to scream. His bones bent backward inside his flesh. His spine pushed through his chest in a white arc before he collapsed. Sigismund stepped into Fulgrim's path. The wall seemed to draw breath. "Little son of a little wall," Fulgrim said, his voice silk over knives. "You shine with such bleak hunger. Has Rogal taught you nothing but denial?" Sigismund raised his sword. "I am not here to speak with you. No, you are here to be remembered." Fulgrim moved. Sigismund was fast beyond mortal comprehension. He had killed champions who were myths to lesser warriors. He had crossed battlefields under fire that would have broken companies and returned with enemy lords dead at his feet. He struck first, because hesitation against a Primarch was suicide. His sword cut for Fulgrim's throat. Fulgrim was not there. The Phoenician flowed aside, laughing, and his blade kissed Sigismund's shoulder. Ceramite opened. Blood flashed hot inside the plate. Sigismund turned the wound into momentum and cut low. Fulgrim bent backward, inhumanly graceful, the sword passing close enough to sever a lock of pale hair. A return stroke struck Sigismund across the chest and hurled him into a crenellation hard enough to crack stone. He rose. Fulgrim applauded with the fingers of one hand against his sword hilt. Again! Sigismund attacked again. He fought beyond the limits of his kind. He gave no ground willingly. He did not chase Fulgrim's feints. He did not answer taunts. He cut for joints, throat, wrists, eyes, tendons, openings that appeared and vanished like lies. Fulgrim rewarded him with wounds. A cut across the thigh. A slash through the gorget that filled Sigismund's helm with blood vapor. A blow that broke ribs and sent warning runes cascading across his sight. Still, the first captain fought. Still he rose. Still he forced Fulgrim, for one breath, then another, to acknowledge that this lesser being would not die beautifully. But he was outmatched. Fulgrim caught Sigismund's blade on his own, twisted, and drove a knee into the Imperial fist's chest. Armor cracked. Sigismund staggered. The demon Primarch's hand closed around his throat and lifted him from the stones. Fulgrim leaned close, smiling through the shriek of guns and dying men. "There is faith in you," Fulgrim whispered. "How curious. How delicious. Does your father know?" Sigismund tried to answer by driving a combat blade into Fulgrim's face. Fulgrim caught the wrist. Bones broke inside the gauntlet. "Ah," Fulgrim breathed. "There you are." A shadow fell across them. Not darkness, not light, mass. Rogal Dorn struck Fulgrim with his shield. There was no challenge, no roar, no speech cast to the heavens. Dorn crossed the wall like an avalanche given purpose and slammed the storm shield into Fulgrim's side with such force that the Phoenician released Sigismund and skidded across the blood-slick stones. The impact cracked the wall beneath them. Fulgrim caught himself in a swirl of impossible grace, one hand touching the ground, eyes bright with amusement and fury. "Brother," Fulgrim said, smiling wide enough to show teeth too perfect for anything living. "At last. I wondered how much beauty I would need to ruin before you came to me." Dorn stepped past Sigismund. "Withdraw to your assigned line," he said. Sigismund coughed blood into his helm. "My lord, I can still fight. You can still obey." The words carried no heat. That made them absolute. Sigismund withdrew. Dorn faced Fulgrim. There was no awe in him, no horror at what his brother had become, no grief visible enough to feed the demon wearing Fulgrim's glory. Dorn looked upon the Phoenician as he looked upon a breached gate, a weakened pillar, a corrupted artery in a fortress wall. Something dangerous, something measurable, something to be stopped. Fulgrim's smile sharpened. "You wound me with that stare, Rogal. No sorrow, no rage, no plea for the brother I was. You are in the way." Fulgrim laughed. The sound made men vomit blood along the parapet. Then he came. Dorn did not meet elegance with elegance. He did not have the Khan's storm speed, nor Sanguinius's radiant fury, nor Magnus's sorcerous splendor. He had weight, timing, force. He had the patience of walls and the certainty of foundations. Fulgrim's blade flickered toward his throat, faster than mortal sight. Dorn moved his shield half a handspan and turned the strike. Fulgrim spun, cutting for knee and wrist in the same flowing motion. Dorn stepped in instead of back. His gauntlet crashed into Fulgrim's breastplate and drove the demon Primarch off rhythm. That was the first wound. Not the cracked armor, not the blood, the rhythm. Fulgrim's war was music, dance, escalation, admiration. Dorn denied him all of it. Every parry was a judgment. Every step shortened the stage. Every blow reduced art to impact. Fulgrim cut him. Of course he did. His blade opened Dorn's pauldron, scored his helm, carved a bright wound across his side, deep enough to show blackened underplate. Dorn bled. He ignored it. Fulgrim laughed and regenerated where bolters and blades had touched him, flesh sealing with obscene ease, skin knitting beneath liquid light. "You cannot kill me," Fulgrim sang. Dorn drove his chain blade into Fulgrim's abdomen. The teeth bit. They screamed. They chewed through impossible flesh and warped plate, spraying luminous blood and pale matter across Dorn's armor. Fulgrim's laughter broke into a hiss. Dorn stepped forward and forced the blade deeper, using his shield to pin Fulgrim's sword arm aside. "No," Dorn said, "but I can hurt you." He tore the chain blade free. Fulgrim staggered. The wound closed almost at once, flesh knitting, armor flowing, perfection reasserting itself like a lie told by a god. But the movement was too quick, too eager, too defensive. Those watching saw it. Fulgrim saw that they saw it. Dorn struck him again. A shield edge smashed into Fulgrim's face and broke the beautiful line of it. Bone cracked, teeth flew. The Phoenician reeled, then healed, the ruin vanishing beneath restored splendor. Dorn gave him no time to enjoy the return. He drove forward, shield, blade, fist, shoulder, the entire logic of him applied as pressure. Fulgrim tried to turn the duel outward, tried to spin, to widen, to make space, to draw eyes and terror and fascination. Dorn cut the space away. Stone broke under Fulgrim's retreating feet. "You are dull," Fulgrim snarled, elegance thinning into spite. "You are predictable." The word struck deeper than the blade. Below them, the tunnels continued to devour the sons of Horus. Abaddon's elite were trapped in darkness built for their deaths. Kill teams moved through pre-cut apertures and sealed murder routes, firing into flanks, vanishing before counterfire could form. Just-Erin Terminators died standing in collapsed galleries, their armor crushed flat beneath fallen ferrocrete or burned open by melter charges. Assault companies found corridors ending in blank walls where maps had promised routes. Teleport beacons flared and brought Imperial fists into the heart of enemy knots, where bolters fired at touching distance and power fists hammered helms into red pulp. A Sons of Horus captain dragged himself through rubble with one arm missing and his armor opened from hip to sternum. He found a loyalist sapper beneath the stones, still alive, pinned and laughing through blood. "What is this place?" the traitor demanded. The sapper spat red across his cracked visor. "A grave with doors." A flamer washed over them both. Abaddon fought on because he was Abaddon. He cut through breaches, smashed shields aside, dragged one Imperial fist close, and crushed the warrior's skull against his own helm. But the trap did not care who raged inside it. Its walls fell where they were meant to fall. Its guns fired from where they had always waited. Its geometry murdered without passion. On the Saturnine wall, Dorn forced Fulgrim back toward the parapet. The Phoenician's expression twisted between delight, anger, and boredom. He wanted transcendence and found masonry. He wanted a duel worthy of song and found a man who treated him like structural failure. He wanted to be hated and was instead obstructed. "Do you know what happens beneath your feet?" Dorn asked. Fulgrim's eyes narrowed. "The sons of Horus have failed. Their elite are dying in tunnels I opened for them. Your wall assault has failed. Your spectacle has purchased nothing. You have spent warriors Horus cannot replace for the privilege of being seen." Fulgrim's smile returned, but it was thinner now. "And you have spent how many, brother? How many of your precious little stones have cracked to make this lesson?" "As many as required." "So cold, so proud of your arithmetic." "No," Dorn said, "merely correct." Fulgrim struck then with sudden fury, a blur of blade and claw and shrieking warp light. Dorn caught the first blow on his shield, took the second across his breastplate, turned the third, and answered with a brutal cut that opened Fulgrim from shoulder to ribs. The demon Primarch arched back, blood spraying in a glittering arc. For a heartbeat, his beauty failed. Something serpentine, wounded and hateful, looked out through the torn mask. Dorn stepped in to finish the motion. Fulgrim leapt away, not backward in fear, not retreat in mortal terms. He withdrew with theatrical disgust, rising atop a broken engine housing, wound closing, smile reforming with visible effort. "How tiresome," he said. "How very, very tiresome." Dorn did not pursue. Fulgrim tilted his head. "You will not chase me?" "No. Afraid. Busy." The insult landed because it was not meant as one. It was fact. Pursuit would be indulgence. Dorn did not indulge. He had a wall to hold, a trap to close, a war to continue, and brothers more strategically relevant than the one preening before him. Fulgrim stared at him for a long moment. Then laughter returned, bright and empty. "Keep your wall, Rogal. Hug it, kiss it, die behind it. I have tasted enough boredom for one day." He turned from the field. The Emperor's children felt the withdrawal like a knife through silk. Some followed at once, laughing as if the retreat were a new pleasure. Others fought on in sudden confusion and were cut apart. Without Fulgrim's presence drawing their madness into shape, the assault lost coherence. Imperial fists advanced by ordered increments. Sigismund's kill cadres struck command knots. leaving headless bodies and severed Vox standards across the wall. The Third Legion fell back over the corpses of its own spectacle. The Saturnine wall held. Beneath it, the tunnels became quieter, not silent. Silence would come later, after the wounded finished dying and the fires consumed their air. But quieter. The sons of Horus' assault had been gutted. The Justarin had been savaged. The underground path had closed into a tomb of crushed Terminator plate, burned flesh, shattered bolters, and Imperial dead who had bought the trap with their lives. Dorn stood upon the wall as the fire slackened. His armor was scored and bleeding. Fulgrim's blood steamed across his blade. Around him, defenders looked at the place where the Phoenician had withdrawn and understood that something impossible had been denied. They wanted it to be victory. Dorn let them have the word only in their own minds. The casualty slate reached him before the cheers could rise. Archimus handed it over without speaking. Dorn read the columns beneath the smoke-dark sky. Loyalist sappers annihilated in the forward tunnels. Breacher companies reduced. Auxilia cohorts destroyed. Gun crews dead. Wall sections compromised. Medici capacity exceeded. Huskarl casualties severe. Ammunition expenditure beyond projection. Saturnine held. Sons of Horus elite losses catastrophic. Emperor's children assault broken. Fulgrim repulsed. A lesser commander might have smiled. Dorn looked past the slate toward the horizon, where Terra still burned beneath Horus's ships. Every triumph cost loyal heroes. Horus could still afford more ruin than Terra could. Dorn returned the slate to Archimus. "Record it," he said. "As victory, Lord." Dorn watched smoke crawl over the dead. "As cost." Legio Mortis walked through fire, and the fire gave way. The god engines came out of the smoke beyond the Mercury wall in ranks of iron blasphemy, each stride shaking the dead soil of Terra, each footfall crushing tanks, bunkers, barricades, gun crews, and entire battalions into paste beneath cathedral-sized heels. They were not machines, as loyal men understood machines. They were walking desecrations, old engines of the Collegia Titanica dragged into the service of madness and crowned with the sigils of the War Master. Their void shields crawled with demonic light. Faces writhed in the shimmer of their protection, pressing outward against the fields as if souls were trapped in the energy barrier and desperate to be born into the world as teeth. The lead warlord Titan emerged through a storm of ash, with its war horn bellowing a note deep enough to split Ferrocrete. Its carapace was plated in black and tarnished bronze. Chains hung from its weapon limbs, each chain burdened with the remains of loyal princeps, moderati, engine seers, and Titan guard taken in earlier battles and nailed into place as offerings. Its head was shaped like a snarling shrine. Fire burned behind its eye lenses. Banners of flayed skin snapped from its shoulders in the hot wind. Around it stalked reavers, their hunched forms bristling with turbo lasers, Gatling blasters, and missile racks. Warhounds loped through the smoke ahead of the heavier engines, lean and predatory, hunting armor formations with the cruel eagerness of starving beasts. Behind them crawled dark Mechanicum support engines, repair arachnids with hooked limbs, scrap code emitters mounted on bone-plated walkers, demon-bound cranes dragging ammunition chains, and tech thralls whose brains had been burned out and replaced with obedience signals that screamed through their mouths as static. The Mercury wall fired everything it had. Macro cannon batteries detonated along the wall's length, their recoil shaking dust from ancient foundations. Defense lasers stabbed through smoke and ash in bright columns. Missile storms rose from hidden silos and burst against void shields in waves of white and orange. Volcano. Cannon fire from loyal engines answered the traitor advance, each beam a line of artificial sunrise carving across the battlefield. The air became a furnace of overlapping energies, radiation blooms and debris trails. Men on the wall died from pressure alone. Others were cooked inside armor that never took a direct hit. Their bodies slid down firing steps as steaming sacks, still locked around weapons they no longer had hands to fire. Legio Ignatum stood before the mercury wall and refused the darkness. The fire wasps had taken their positions among the ruined approaches, their red and black god engines braced amid collapsed avenues, crater fields, and shattered manufactoria blocks. Their princeps had made their oaths. Their moderati had locked themselves into command cradles. Their crews had sung the awakening hymns until their voices bled into engine thought. They stood not because they believed they would survive, but because the wall behind them needed hours and hours were purchased in the currency of god death. A loyal warlord named Invictus Ferrum fired its volcano cannon into the lead mortis engine. The beam struck the traitor's void shield and spread across it in a sphere of raging light. For 3 heartbeats, the shield held. Faces in the field screamed without sound. Then the barrier collapsed, and the beam punched through the warlord's upper torso. Armor slagged. Internal decks evaporated. Crew thralls became brief shadows against molten metal. The traitor engine staggered, bellowing through ruptured war horns. Every loyal gun turned toward it. Before the kill could be completed, scrap code howled through the noosphere. It came as a storm of impossible commandments, crawling into Auspex feeds, reactor hymns, shield canticles, and moderati thought streams. Tech priests convulsed at their stations. Some bit through their own tongues. Some clawed out augmetic eyes as hostile code unfolded in their vision, like scripture written by insects. A moderatus aboard Invictus Ferrum screamed that his hands were full of spiders, though his hands were plugged to the manifold and had not moved in years. The loyal warlord's targeting matrix spasmed. Its next shot went wide, turning a kilometer of dead city into sun-hot glass instead of finishing the wounded enemy. Dark Mechanicum engines swarmed the damaged Mortis warlord. Their repair rites were not repairs. They were acts of possession. Mechadendrites punched into molten wounds. Chains of barbed data cable threaded themselves through exposed systems. Bound things shrieked inside bronze caskets and poured warp force into dead conduits. The traitor engine, wounded beyond any sane measure, straightened. Its broken armor flexed. Its reactor growl deepened. Flesh that had no place inside a titan pulsed in the gaps where sacred machinery should have been. It resumed walking. In Barb Bastion, Rogal Dorn watched the Mercury front through a hololith that could not convey the sound. Perhaps that was mercy. The strategic projection showed god engines as towering icons, shield states, reactor heat, weapon arcs, and collapse predictions. Loyal units in gold, traitor engines in red, contested districts in amber, dead districts in black. The mercury wall pulsed with damage markers along its outer skin. Behind it, labor districts and transit arteries crowded with panicked movement despite suppression orders. Dorn stood among Princeps liaison officers, Mechanicum representatives, fleet gunnery adepts, and Imperial army commanders. None of them looked comfortable. Titan war was not a thing that could be fully commanded from a chamber, even by a Primarch. The god engines had their own wrath. Their princeps were enthroned inside machine souls older than nations. Engine pride, reactor instinct, manifold ghosts, and mechanicum rights shaped decisions faster than any distant order could be transmitted and obeyed. Dorn understood this. He did not like it. Understanding did not require liking. Legio Ignatum requests permission to advance 2 maniples to close engagement, said a Mechanicum liaison, his voice rendered in flat machine tones. Denied, Dorn said. Their Princeps Signoris reports that ranged exchange favors Mortis due to demon shield recovery. If they advance, they will be isolated and killed. They assert they can cripple the Mortis center. They will cripple 1 engine and lose 4. The liaison clicked through an internal exchange. The Princeps Signoris disputes the projection. The Princeps Signoris is inside a god engine being shot at by other god engines. His perspective is not improved by proximity. The liaison bowed with visible reluctance. Order transmitted. Another officer spoke from the armor reserve station. Lord Praetorian, Karen Armored Group requests release authority. They report a route through the lower furnace district. They believe they can strike the Warhound screen and relieve pressure on Ignatum's left. Dorn examined the sector. The officer's plan was brave. It was also useless. Denied. My lord, their commanders insist they can blunt the advance. Tanks cannot stop God engines. They can engage Warhounds. For minutes, then the Reavers will erase them. Karen remains in reserve. The officer hesitated. Then the lower furnace district will be lost. It is already lost. There are still loyal formations inside. They will delay the Warhounds. The officer lowered his gaze. Dorn moved Karen Armored Group behind an inner corridor. After Mortis passes the furnace district, their rear support engines will be exposed. Karen will counterattack then. My lord, the men in the district are calling for extraction. They are calling from a place no longer on the board. The words did not echo. The strategium consumed them. On the Mercury front, a Warhound burst through a smoke bank and opened fire on a loyal bunker line. Its plasma blast gun discharged with a roar that turned air to boiling light. The bunker vanished, not collapsed, not shattered, vanished. The men inside became vapor and mineral ash. The Warhound bounded forward, its second weapon, a Vulcan megabolter, chewing through a retreating tank column. Shells the size of men punched into Lehman Russ hulls and tore them apart. One tank's turret spun upward in flame, trailing the burning torsos of its crew. Another was struck through the side, ammunition cooking off in a chain of explosions that blew open the hull and sprayed molten metal across infantry trying to shelter behind it. A loyal Reaver, Bellator Ignis, intercepted the Warhound before it could complete the kill. Its chain fist came down, a vast roaring blade of adamantium teeth and power field fury. The Warhound twisted aside, fast for something so enormous, but not fast enough. The chain fist tore through its flank, ripping away armor plates and exposed motive bundles. The smaller engine screamed through its warhorn. Bellator Ignis fired its melter cannon into the wound. The Warhound's reactor containment failed. It died in a bloom of white fire that swallowed both engines from sight. When the light cleared, Bellator Ignis was still standing. Then, a Mortis Reaver shot it through the head. The cockpit fortress vanished. Princeps, Moderati, Command Throne, and Sacred Manifold became a spray of burning fragments. Bellator Ignis took one step without a mind, then toppled forward into the corpse of the Warhound it had killed. The impact crushed 2 companies of loyal infantry sheltering in the ruins below. Their deaths did not appear as individual runes on Dorn's map. They became a darkening of the sector. Legio Ignatum died magnificently. It was not enough. Their engines killed traitor titans. They broke Warhounds, wounded Reavers, stripped shields from warlords, and forced Legio Mortis to slow. A Firewasp warlord stood with one arm blown off and continued firing its carapace weapons until a plasma annihilator struck its torso and turned its reactor into a caged sun. Another loyal Reaver rammed a wounded Mortis engine and overloaded its own plasma heart, taking both God engines down in a mushrooming pillar of white heat. Warhounds hunted in pairs through smoke, tearing into corrupted support engines before being caught and butchered by heavier guns. Every death brought distance. Every distance became time. Every time became another entry in Dorn's ledger. Behind the Mercury wall, the palace population was put to work under armed watch. There were no civilians now. Dorn had ended that fiction before the first skyfire. Men who had expected evacuation found themselves issued respirators, load harnesses, and shock collars keyed to overseer commands. Archive clerks carried macro shells on grav sledges until their backs tore. Temple attendants dragged corpses into rendering pits while chanting prayers they had once reserved for holy days. Under-palace labor clans hauled ammunition through corridors slick with condensation and blood. Half-trained auxilia dug new trenches through plazas where statues had been ground into gravel. Corpse clearance gangs moved among the wounded with hooks, saws and tags, sorting the living from the useful dead. Bombardment turned their districts into open graves even as they worked. A shell struck a habstack behind the Mercury wall and split it from crown to base. Thousands fell with it. Dust and bodies poured into the avenue below. The survivors were ordered to clear the transit route before the next ammunition convoy arrived. They obeyed, because the overseers had guns, because the palace had no room for grief, and because the screams buried under the rubble were already quieter than the artillery. In one loading artery, a boy not yet grown enough to shave tried to stop dragging shells and stare at the burning horizon where god engines traded sunlight and damnation. A palace enforcer struck him with the butt of a shock maul. "Move." "My father is out there," the boy said. The enforcer looked toward the Mercury wall. "Then he is buying your next breath. Spend it correctly." The boy lifted the shell harness again. The Mercury wall began to buckle, not collapse. Dorn had designed too many redundancies for simple failure. But buckle. Shield harmonics degraded. Outer bastions fell silent. Transit chambers behind the wall choked with wounded and smoke. Mortis engines reached firing angles they should not have reached for several more hours. The Dark Mechanicum's scrap code gnawed at recovery systems faster than the loyal adepts could purge it. Legio Ignatum's remaining engines pulled back by necessity, not order, because dead god engines blocked their lines of fire and wounded ones needed space to die without killing their own. Dorn watched the wall's projected endurance drop. Archimus stood beside him, silent as ever. "The Mercury front can still hold," said an Imperial army general. His uniform was torn, his face grey. "With reserves and armor, it can hold." Dorn did not look at him. "No. My lord, if the wall fails, the enemy gains the inner approaches. The enemy was always going to gain those approaches." The general stared at him. "Then why spend so much to hold Mercury?" Dorn turned then. "To determine the price." The general had no answer. Dorn issued the order. "Begin fallback to prepared inner kill zones. Mercury outer bastions are to continue firing until overrun. Ammunition that cannot be moved will be detonated. Wounded without mobility remain with rear charges. Labor battalions behind the wall will shift to obstruction work. Collapse transit galleries Ash 4 through Ash 11 after passage of assigned formations. Karen Armored Group will prepare for counter-attack against Mortis rear elements once their primary engines pass." The order spread. The Mercury front withdrew by bleeding layers. Men retreated through trenches under Titan shadow, dragging the wounded until they could no longer drag, then leaving them with pistols, grenades, or nothing. Imperial fists held junctions while army regiments fell back through them. Mechanicum adepts severed cables from shield shrines and died when feedback burned their nerves into smoke. War engines of Legio Ignatum stepped backward through ruins, firing as they went, their armor blackened, their banners burning, their machine spirits howling in the manifold. Legio Mortis pressed forward. The palace ceased to look like a fortress. It became a tomb with guns. Every corridor led to a killing ground. Every retreat sealed men behind doors that would not open again. Every wall had charges in its bones. Every plaza had firing lines measured by the corpses already lying there. Dorn had not conceded defeat. He had merely arrived at the next prepared death. Then Angron struck. He came through the fire like a living warhead, faster than any monster of his size had a right to move, a red ruin of wings, chains, brass, muscle, and impossible rage. Artillery found him and burst across his path. It did not stop him. Lascanon beams struck and slid across demonic resilience. Plasma fire scorched him. He roared and the sound broke men, not metaphorically. Helm lenses cracked, eardrums burst, hearts stopped in mortal chests. World Eaters followed in his wake. But for a moment, they did not matter. Nothing mattered, but the shape of the Red Angel crossing the broken Mercury approaches, as if distance itself had offended him. He hit the loyal line, where Ignatum wreckage, Imperial fists, army survivors and armor reserves intersected in forced withdrawal. The impact shattered the stalemate. A Baneblade turned its main cannon toward him. Angron landed on its hull before it fired, buried one axe into the turret ring, and ripped the turret free in a shriek of tortured metal. The crew inside spilled out with the machinery, crushed, burning, still strapped into their stations. He hurled the turret into a retreating infantry column and turned men into a red smear across the road. An Imperial fist struck him with a thunderhammer. Angron backhanded the warrior into a wall hard enough to burst him open inside his plate. Blood sprayed from the armor seams as the body slid down stone that had already been painted by 1,000 deaths. The hololith in Bab Bastion flared with cascading failure markers. Even hardened generals stopped pretending the fallback remained orderly. Dorn watched Angron's rune tear open the front. For the first time that day, he moved faster. Seal the western arteries, redirect Karen, collapse the furnace galleries now, release Sigismund's reserve to the inner choke, not the breach. Do not feed him to Angron. I will not spend him there. Bring the 7th line back by increments. The wall is dead. The tomb remains. Orders flew outward through blood, static and fire. The Mercury wall died behind the retreating defenders, its guns still firing as Legio Mortis walked over its corpse. Angron's roar followed them inward. The palace drew its surviving men deeper, into darker corridors, narrower gates, and prepared graves. Dorn had traded another wall for time, and the time was already bleeding away. Jagatai Khan entered Bab Bastion like the wind entering a tomb. The command chamber did not welcome him. It was too still for welcome, too measured, too deep beneath stone and war to understand the movement of a man who hated walls. The hololithic light cast terror across the air in layers of wound color, gold for what still held, red for what the traitors had taken, black for what no longer mattered, because nothing living remained there. Lion's Gate spaceport pulsed in diseased amber, contested in name and dying in truth. Around it, enemy landing vectors thickened with every passing hour. The Khan looked at the projection and saw a snare tightening around the throat of the palace. Dorn saw the same thing and had already measured how long strangulation would take. "You are retreating again," the Khan said. His voice carried no courtesy. It never wasted time on decoration. Dorn stood on the far side of the hololith, armor scarred from Saturnine, face pale beneath old blood and stone dust. Around him, officers and adepts lowered their eyes. Archimus remained near his Primarch's left, silent behind the discipline of a huscarl. Vox feeds crawled with pleas from dying sectors. Gunfire trembled through the deep foundations, like distant thunder trapped inside mountains. "I am preserving the inner defense," Dorn said. "You are folding your lines around your own throat. I am closing the fist." The Khan's expression sharpened. A fist that never strikes is only a cage. A cage is how beasts are held. And when the cage fills with poison, then the beast dies inside it. Jagatai stepped closer to the hololith. The light painted his face in red and gold. He smelled of smoke, speed, burned oil, and open sky, though Terra had no clean sky left to offer any son of the Emperor. His armor bore the scars of the siege, but his presence still cut through the stale air of command, like a blade drawn in motion. The white scars gathered behind him in silence, stormseers and Khans of the Brotherhood, helms under arms, eyes bright with the need to ride. "Lion's Gate is a wound," Jagatai said. "It bleeds traitors into your palace. Every hour you allow it to remain open, Horus pours more iron, more guns, more engines, more dead men with weapons into your killing grounds. You know this. I know it better than you. Then why does it still stand in enemy hands? Because taking it back costs forces assigned to the inner palace. Everything costs forces." Dorn's gaze did not move. Some costs by survival, some by pride. The Khan smiled then, but there was no warmth in it. You think this pride? I think you hate being enclosed. I hate dying by inches because the man beside me thinks bleeding is a form of architecture. The chamber went utterly still. Archimus shifted the smallest fraction. Dorn did not. You wish to strike Lion's Gate, Dorn said. I will strike Lion's Gate. You ask permission, as if you have already decided. I inform you because this is your wall. This is my war. No, the Khan said. This is our father's war. You built the cage. Let me be the knife through its bars. For a long moment, only the alarm spoke. Dorn looked down at the amber wound of Lion's Gate. He did not see glory. He did not see the release of pent-up fury or the romance of a counterattack. He saw landing tonnage, Titan descent capacity, siege engine flow rates, enemy reinforcement density, fuel corridors, transit arteries. The spaceport in traitor hands accelerated the palace's death. The Khan was right, which made the risk more tolerable and no less dangerous. You will not hold it, Dorn said. I know. You will cripple it. Yes. You will cut their flow, not seek honor. The Khan's smile vanished. Do not mistake me for Fulgrim. I do not. Or Angron. I do not. Then speak plainly. Dorn enlarged the hololith. Lion's Gate unfolded in layers. Broken hangar cathedrals, burning loading avenues, fuel vaults, collapsed lift shafts, captured landing aprons, and transit arteries choked by traitor movement. Red streams pushed inward from the outer fields. Death Guard formations held the eastern saturation zones. Iron warriors occupied gun terraces. Sons of Horus command nodes moved among landing relays. Farther out, through static and chemical interference, Mortarian's presence pulsed like a plague heart. You will launch here, Dorn said, marking a corridor through ruins so saturated with Phosphex ghosts and corpse fog that even the hololith seemed reluctant to render it. Your first wave will pass through artillery corridor Ashwind. You will have 8 minutes before enemy counter-battery fire closes it. 8 minutes is a road. You will receive no heavy reserve from the inner palace. I did not ask for your chain tanks. You will receive surviving fast armor, jet bike formations, assault carriers, and designated White Scars elements already assigned to mobile reserve. No more. You give little. I give what the palace can survive losing. The Khan leaned over the hololith until his reflection shone across the burning spaceport. That will be enough. It must be, Dorn said, because if it fails, I will not spend the sanctum to retrieve you. Jagatai laughed once, low and sharp. There he is. The wall speaks. The wall remains. And the storm rides. The offensive began before the smoke had settled from the last bombardment. White Scars engines woke across hidden mustering roads and shattered transit yards. Jet bikes screamed alive on gravitic snarls, their prows painted with storm marks and kill script. Their riders hunched low in white armor streaked with ash. Outrider packs revved engines until the ground shook. Fast attack carriers lifted from blast cradles. Surviving loyal armor growled from covered positions. Scarred predators, Sicarans, sabers, and battered Lehman Russ squadrons assigned to speed rather than endurance. Their hulls were caked with dust and old gore. Their crews had not slept. Sleep had become another civilian luxury, and terror had run out of those. The Khan rode at the front. He did not give a speech that asked men to survive. He did not promise victory. He did not speak of history. His warriors already knew history was watching with a severed face. He raised his blade toward the corpse-fogged horizon and spoke through the command vox. Ride where the enemy believes the road is dead. Cut what he needs. Leave him choking. Then the White Scars moved. They launched through fire lanes Dorn had opened by killing other men elsewhere. Artillery walked ahead of them in perfect increments, shells bursting across Death Guard pickets, collapsing ruined towers, lifting infected earth in geysers of black mud. Defense lasers stabbed over their heads at incoming aircraft. Smoke shells burst laying curtains of ash-grey vapor across the approach. The fast columns tore through debris fields where aircraft wreckage still burned, and corpses lay fused to the metal of the road. The first Death Guard saturation zone swallowed them whole. Plague fog rolled low and thick across the ground, yellow, green and grey, crawling like a living thing. It clung to armor and seeped into cracks. It ate paint from hulls. It turned exposed skin black. Men inside sealed vehicles heard it scratching at filters like fingernails. The dead stood inside it, or what had been dead before the warp made mockery of endings. Loyal corpses rose from mud, faces swollen, eyes milk-white, laser guns still clutched in ruined hands. They fired without aim until jet bikes cut through them and reduced them to spinning meat. Rad mortars thumped from hidden emplacements. Shells burst among the scars, invisible murder wrapped in dust and light. Warning runes flared across helm lenses. One rider jerked in the saddle as his armor seals failed under corrosive vapor. His body cooked inside his plate, but he held his course long enough to slam his jet bike into a Death Guard gun nest. The explosion tore open the emplacement and scattered plague marines in chunks of rotted ceramite and diseased flesh. Phosphex burned in the ruins. It clung to the roads in crawling green flame, hungry and almost sentient. A white Scar tank slewed to avoid it and took a Lascannon round through the side. Its ammunition cooked off. The hull split open, spilling burning crewmen into the road. They rolled, screaming, and the Phosphex found them. Their screams became higher, thinner, then stopped as their bodies continued burning long after flesh should have been gone. The Khan did not slow. Motion was survival. Motion was defiance. Motion was the oath of Chogoris made manifest on Terra's strangled soil. Death Guard lines emerged from the fog like cliffs of rust and bone. Their armor was corroded, pitted, wet with chemical filth. Horns and pipes jutted from helms and backpacks. They carried bolters, plague knives, rusted cleavers, scythes and rad weapons that clicked and hissed with unclean pressure. They did not brace against the charge with panic. They endured it. Jet bikes struck their lines with explosive speed, lances and blades opening throats, severing limbs, punching through bloated armor. The Death Guard fell, rose, fired, fell again. Some kept walking after losing half their skulls. Some fired from the ground while their legs were crushed beneath loyal tank treads. Others laughed wetly as their bodies came apart. Dorn watched from Bab Bastion. He did not watch like a father. He watched like a siege engine receiving motion data. "Artillery corridor Ashwind closing in 3 minutes," said a gunnery officer. "Extend by 30 heartbeats," Dorn said. "My lord, that will expose Battery 9 to counterfire." Battery 9 is already indexed by enemy guns. Fire until destroyed. The order went out. Battery 9 obeyed. Its guns boomed from a sunken emplacement behind the inner ridge, shells passing over the Khan's advance and tearing open Death Guard support columns. Enemy counterfire found it moments later. The battery disappeared beneath a walking barrage. The gun crews died beside their weapons. Their last shells landed on target. "White Scar's vanguard entering secondary corridor," said Archimus. "Release smoke curtain." "Inner reserve commanders request permission to support." "Denied. They report the Khan's left flank is thinning. It is supposed to thin. Speed narrows the flank. Their losses are severe. Not yet severe enough to alter the plan." The hololith flashed with red pressure around the offensive spear. Dawn fed the Khan windows, not rescue. A minute here, a bombardment there, a denial coordinate that collapsed a Death Guard counter route beneath tons of broken ferrocrete. He refused every request that touched the inner palace reserve. Those forces were for the walls that had not yet died. The Khan's riders were already in the open. They had been spent the moment the attack began. The battle became motion inside Apocalypse. Jet bikes screamed through corpse fog, their engines leaving ripples in poisoned air. White Scars cut through supply arteries, severing fuel lines, slicing through convoy guards, blowing ammunition crawlers and Command relays before vanishing into smoke. Tanks crushed plague masses beneath their tracks, grinding bodies that burst like overripe fruit, spraying black fluid across hulls and treads. Outriders swept around the flanks, bolters firing in controlled bursts, chain blades taking heads from Death Guard officers too slow to turn. Assault carriers dropped squads onto landing control towers, where traitor signal crews died under curved blades and bolt pistols. The Death Guard absorbed it like rotting mountains absorbing rain. They lost hundreds and did not break. They lost guns and kept firing. They lost limbs and kept advancing. Their lines bent with sickening patience, closing behind the scars, trying to turn speed into entrapment. Mortarian's will pressed across the field like poisoned gravity. The air thickened. Engines coughed. Men heard flies inside sealed helms. Filters failed. Blood curdled in veins. Wounded warriors who fell behind were not merely killed. They were swallowed by fog and returned as stumbling things with white scars markings still visible beneath rot. Then Mortarion came. He moved through the poison as its lord and source, vast, reaper-shaped, wings dragging shadows through chemical haze. Silence gathered around him despite the guns. His scythe cut arcs through smoke, and wherever it passed, men died before the blade touched them. The Khan saw him and turned toward him without hesitation. Dorn saw the turn on the hololith. "Do not," he said, though the Vox link had not opened. The Khan did. He drove into Mortarion like a blade into a corpse king. Their clash was everything Dorn's war was not. It was speed and fury, and the refusal to concede the shape of the battlefield to another's design. The Khan struck, withdrew, struck again, each attack a storm front given edge. Mortarion endured, scythe sweeping, plague aura rolling outward in choking waves. Around them, scars and Death Guard died in heaps, loyal speed breaking against traitor endurance. A jet bike spiraled overhead in flame and crashed between the Primarchs. Neither looked away. "You ride in circles," Mortarion rasped, voice like burial soil poured into a throat. "All roads end in rot." The Khan's blade flashed and cut diseased vapor apart. "Then I will make a new road through you." Mortarion swung. The Khan was gone. Then there, blade striking armor, drawing foul blood, moving before the reply could finish forming. It was not a duel for applause. It was not theater. It was the storm refusing the grave. Every heartbeat the Khan held Mortarion's attention. White Scar's strike teams cut deeper into Lion's Gate. The spaceport bled. Landing relays exploded in sequence. Fuel arteries went up in rolling pillars of black fire. Captured lift shafts collapsed under charges planted by riders who never stopped long enough to see their work. Death Guard control points were severed from Iron Warriors' artillery grids. Sons of Horus landing coordinators died with blades in their throats, and data slates still clutched in armored fists. A Titan descent cradle, forced into a corrupted landing approach, lost signal cohesion and crashed onto a traitor armor park. The impact crushed tanks, siege engines and hundreds of men into a molten crater. For a time, Lion's Gate belonged to speed. Not wholly, never cleanly, but enough. Enough to halve the flow. Enough to choke the War Master's reinforcement rhythm. Enough to turn a throat into a wound full of knives. The cost was catastrophic. By the time the Scars began their withdrawal, their columns were ragged, burning, and reduced. Jetbike formations returned as scattered pairs. Fast armor limped back, with tracks clogged by infected flesh and hulls pitted by chemical corrosion. Some riders came back with plague marks, already darkening their skin beneath helm seals. Others did not come back at all. The Khan's signal flickered, vanished, returned, vanished again beneath the pressure of Mortarion's presence and the storm of jamming static. Barb Bastion received the first success projection before it received reliable casualty figures. Dorn read both when they arrived. Lion's Gate flow capacity reduced by nearly half. Heavy landing operations disrupted. Titan descent delayed. fuel routes damaged, traitor control networks severed in 3 major arteries, White Scars losses severe, loyal armor losses severe, mobile reserve depleted, Khan's status unstable. Mortarion still active, spaceport not held, spaceport crippled. Archimus waited, the officers waited. Dorn placed the slate down. Successful operation, he said. No one cheered. They had learned by then that success in the Praetorian's mouth sounded too much like burial. Shall we prepare reinforcement for exploitation? Asked an army general, hope making him foolish for one breath. No. The man faltered. My lord? Mine the surviving routes. Archimus turned slightly. For defense? For abandonment? The chamber absorbed the words. Dorn moved his gauntlet across the hololith, marking the roads the Khan had opened, the arteries the scars had bled to clear, the passages through which wounded riders were still returning. He marked them for charges, collapses, fuel floods, and interdiction fire. Every route that remains useful to us will soon be useful to Horus, Dorn said. Prepare them to die when we are finished with them. Outside, the Khan's survivors rode back through ash and corpse fog, carrying victory like a wound. Behind them, Lion's Gate burned, not saved, not lost entirely, but crippled enough to matter. Dorn watched the new lines settle into place. Every victory was already becoming the next retreat. The inner palace burned differently from the outer war. Beyond the first curtains and the Mercury dead, the siege had been an apocalypse of open ground, of trenches crushed beneath engines, of walls hammered flat by guns large enough to make mountains tremble. Here, within the deep districts of the Emperor's last redoubt, the war became intimate. It entered chapels, transit vaults, processional stairways, reliquary halls, archive cloisters, and sanctum roads. It spilled through doors men had believed would never open, and over floors polished by centuries of obedience. It climbed through ventilation arteries and burst from maintenance shafts. It breathed through cracks in reality itself. The inner palace was a continent of wounds, districts burned behind sealed gates, sanctums that had once housed treaties, gene codices, and the relics of unity were breached and blackened, their contents trampled into the same ash as the men who had defended them. Refugee columns moved through the smoke under the muzzles of their own protectors, no longer civilians, no longer citizens, not even subjects in any meaningful sense. They were obstruction, unless assigned to labor. They were breath and bone that had not yet been converted into use. Wounded custodes moved among the inner approaches with the terrible silence of damaged statues. Some had rent auramite plate, black blood drying in the cracks. Some leaned upon guardian spears that had lost their blades. None asked for aid where the Emperor's safety was not served by their survival. Blood angels stood beside Imperial fists along the killing avenues, crimson and yellow beneath soot. Angels and walls reduced to the same work of holding back the end. Shattered army formations filled the spaces between them, Lazarifals clutched in hands too tired to tremble, uniforms stiff with dried gore, eyes emptied by the sight of things no mortal mind had been built to endure. And the demons came. They did not advance like soldiers. They spilled through wounds in the air, squeezed out of shadows, crawled from the mouths of corpses, unfolded from reflections in pools of blood. Horned things bounded over barricades on backward-jointed legs. Winged shapes clung to ceilings and dropped among gun crews in shrieking knots. Others dragged themselves forward as masses of teeth and claws and wet laughter, dying under bolter fire only to become smoke, then faces, then hunger again. Reality had grown thin around the palace. The warp pressed against it with a million starving hands. At the end of the great approaches stood the Eternity Gate. It was not merely a gate. It was the final statement of the Imperial Palace, a threshold vast enough for titans to kneel before, high enough for smoke to gather beneath its arch in storm clouds, broad enough for entire armies to die upon its steps. Beyond it lay the deeper sanctum,
the forbidden heart, the last roads toward the master of mankind, and the throne upon which the fate of the species had begun to narrow. Every wall before it had been measured in hours. Every death before it had been converted into delay. Now the accounting had reached the final doors. Sanguinius stood before the
gate where all could see him. That was his gift and his burden. The angel shone despite the ash. His wings were torn in places, feathers burned and blood dark at the edges, but still they rose behind him like a memory of skies before terror's poisoning. His armor was battered gold, scored by claws and blades and the heat of impossible fires. Blood streaked his face. His eyes were not untouched by grief, yet grief had not bent him. Men saw him and remembered how to stand. Warriors with broken bones locked their knees. Gunners whose hands had begun to shake found their triggers again. Blood angels lifted their blades and became something terrible and beautiful in the sight of their Primarch. Even the Imperial fists, who needed no inspiration to hold, seemed harder in his presence, as if the wall had been lit from within. Rogal Dorn was not beside him. Dorn stood in a lower command artery beneath the gate, where the light was red, the air was thick with machine heat, and the walls shook with the thunder of the final assault. His armor was scarred, his face ashen, his eyes fixed upon a projection that rendered the eternity approaches as lines, doors, pressure points, and dying formations. Around him stood Archimus, surviving command staff, Mechanicum adepts, and officers whose names had long ceased to matter in the scale of the ruin. They did not look to Dorn for hope. No sane man ever had. They looked to him for decisions. "Corridor Argent 7 is breached," said a Vox officer. "Blood Angels rear guard still engaged. They request permission to withdraw through Gate Heliostat." Dorn studied the corridor. Demonic pressure indicators flared along its length. The rearguard's rune flickered, still alive, still fighting, still useful for heartbeats. Denied. The officer closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. "My lord, if Heliostat remains open, they can fall back. If Heliostat remains open, the breach follows them. They are loyal warriors. They are outside the useful line. Shall they be informed? They know." The officer transmitted the seal order. On the projection, Gate Heliostat closed. The Blood Angels outside it continued fighting. Their armor runes winked out one by one beneath a bloom of red and warp shadow. Dorn moved to the next crisis. That was his role. Not visible myth, not the uplift of breaking hearts. Sanguinius gave men the strength to die with names on their lips. Dorn chose the doors that would close before those names were finished. He sealed corridors. He abandoned forces. He ordered flame through infected wards where wounded men still screamed for medici care, because demonic corruption had touched their blood, and mercy could not be allowed to become a breach vector. He gave the commands that no statue would ever commemorate, and no survivor would ever forgive. A medici channel opened without permission, forced through by panic. "Command, this is Triage Cloister Bellum. Infection signs among the wounded. We have Blood Angels, Fists, Army personnel, Custodian retainers. We need quarantine guidance. We need time." Dorn looked at the cloister's location. Too close to the Third Sanctum Road. Too many uncontrolled bodies. Too much warp activity in the adjoining transit ribs. "Burn it," the medici voice broke. "My lord, seal Bellum. Prometheum purge. No survivors are to exit. There are hundreds inside. There is one road behind them that must not be compromised." The channel filled with shouting, pleading, a prayer. Then Archimus cut it. Dorn's face did not change. Above, Angren came against the Eternity Gate. His presence turned battle into berserk unreality. The World Eaters flooded forward around him in a red tide, chain axes shrieking, armor slick with gore, until their old colors were buried beneath the work of their hands. They climbed over barricades, over corpses, over one another, each warrior driven by the nails, and by the greater madness of the demon Primarch at their head. They killed with a ferocity beyond tactics. They tore men apart and kept running with limbs still clutched in their fists. They bit through throat seals. They split helms. They drove chain blades into firing slits until the teeth jammed on bone and then used their fists. Demons climbed over them like living flame. The line before the Eternity Gate answered with everything left. Imperial fists held in. Geometric refusal. Shield squads locked together in the shadow of the gate, bolters firing in disciplined ranks, falling back by exact measure when pressure demanded it and no further. Heavy weapon teams fired through gaps that opened for breaths and closed again. Each withdrawal left charges behind. Each charge turned corridors into tombs. Blood angels fought as fury given grace. They leapt from broken statuary and shattered gun platforms into the World Eater's surge, blades flashing, jump packs roaring through corpse smoke. They killed beautifully, and then they killed horribly when beauty failed. Some were lost to the red thirst amid the horror and had to be dragged back or left to carve themselves dead among the enemy. Others fought with tears of blood on their faces, singing hymns of Baal through clenched teeth, while demons tore at their armor. Side by side, the sons of the angel and the sons of the wall made an argument in blood. One answered damnation with wrath. The other answered it by refusing to move. Neither was enough alone. The custodes entered only where the warp pressure bent toward the sanctum. They did not reinforce the line where men merely died. They struck where demons sought the roads inward. Golden figures moved through smoke and unreality, guardian spears cutting entities that should not have possessed flesh. Beside them came the silent sisterhood, null maidens in war panoply, their presence a cold absence that made demons shriek and stumble. Around them, witchlight guttered, warp flame thinned. Mortal men near them felt terror change shape into nausea and awe. Dawn released them in precise measures, never enough to satisfy the pleas of commanders, never where honor would have sent them. They were not there to win duels. They were there to prevent the Emperor's last threshold from becoming an open wound. Captain General requests clarification, said a liaison. Custodian Reserve remains uncommitted while the left stair collapses. Clarification denied, Dorn said. The left stair can die. The inner sanctum road cannot. By your will. The gate trembled. Angron reached the great steps. The Red Angel was a wound in the shape of a god. Chains whipped from his armor. His axes dripped light and blood and hatred. His wings beat once and hurled men from their feet. A predator tank fired into him at close range. The shell struck his chest and detonated. Angron laughed through the smoke, seized the tank by its cannon, and tore the barrel away with a wrench of metal that shrieked louder than the dying crew. He smashed the weapon through the hull and left the tank burning with men trapped inside, hammering against hatches fused shut by heat. Sanguinius descended to meet him. The sight stopped men from fleeing. The angel fell from the broken heights above the gate, wings spread, blade in hand, fire behind him, ash beneath him. For one impossible moment, he seemed less a warrior than an answer. Angron looked up and roared, and the roar broke marble, burst eardrums, and sent lesser demons scattering like carrion birds before a storm. Then the brothers met. Their impact shook the gate. Sanguinius struck with speed and sorrow and wrath, every blow carrying the weight of a doomed empire. Angron answered with ruin. Axes tore through stone where the angel had stood a heartbeat before. Wings beat against wings. Blood fell in sheets. The Red Angel's rage made the air scream. The angel's defiance made men rise from the mud after wounds that should have ended them. Around the Primarchs, battle became secondary. Even the demons looked upon them with hunger and fear. Dorn watched the clash as a distortion on the command projection, a storm of impossible energy where no clean reading could hold. He could not command that. No one could. Sanguinius bought time no strategy could have purchased. Dorn knew the difference. He did not resent it. He used it. While Angron is fixed, Seal lower amber routes, Dorn said. Move ammunition to the final gun platforms. Collapse the eastern corpse ramps. Send the 7th to reinforce the gate hinges. No countercharge beyond the threshold. A general stared at him. The angel is out there. Yes. And if he falls, then the gate closes faster. The general said nothing after that. At last, the order came to close the Eternity Gate. It was not a single act. It was a continental mechanism, awakening. Chains larger than hab blocks tightened within the walls. Adamantium pistons groaned. Ceramite shutters descended in layered sequence. Rune locks flared. Machine spirits that had slept in sacred readiness for centuries answered with the slow wrath of giants. Outside, men saw it beginning. Some cheered because they thought it meant salvation. Others screamed because they understood they were on the wrong side of the closing world. Rearguard formations fell back through the narrowing gap in broken clusters. Imperial fists walked backward, firing until their bolters clicked empty, then using pistols, blades, and fists. Blood angels dragged wounded brothers beneath the descending shadow. Army soldiers ran, stumbled, were crushed in the press, or torn apart by world eaters at their heels. Demons clawed over the dead, trying to reach the threshold before it sealed. Custodes struck them down in flashes of gold and blood. Silent sisters stood in the gate shadow, like blades of absence, and the Neverborn recoiled where their null presence touched the air. "Hold the closure," someone begged over the vox. "There are still men outside." Dorn looked at the timing sequence. Seconds mattered now. Not lives. Seconds. "Continue closure." "My lord, the rearguard has not cleared." "Continue." The gate descended. A blood angel captain outside the threshold looked back once and saw the decision. He saluted. Then a world eater struck him from behind and drove a chain axe into his spine. The captain fired his plasma pistol into the traitor's face as he fell, and both vanished beneath the feet of the next wave. The Eternity Gate closed upon mountains of dead. The final gap narrowed from the height of titans to the height of men, then to the height of a man's outstretched arm. Hands reached through it, some loyal, some not. Fingers clawed at the inner stone. A wounded Imperial fist tried to push a mortal trooper through ahead of him. Both were dragged back by red hands and demonic claws. The gate sealed before their screams ended. Ceramite and adamantium swallowed the sound. Then came the demon roar, muted behind the barrier, but vast enough to make dust fall from the inner vaults. The gate held. For the length of one breath, terror lived behind it. Dorn stood beneath the red light of the command artery and listened to the silence that followed. It was not peace. It was the sound of everything outside becoming enemy ground. A Vox officer turned slowly from his station. "My lord," Dorn looked at him. "A transmission. Priority absolute. Authenticated through multiple fleet ghosts and astropathic confirmation. It is from orbit." The chamber seemed to tighten around the words. "Speak." The vengeful spirit has lowered her shields. No one moved. Even the machines seemed to pause in their suffering. Dorn stepped toward the hololith. Above the projection of the sealed gate, beyond the burning atmosphere, beyond the enemy-clotted void, the War Master's flagship appeared as a black wound in the heavens. Its shields, impossible until that moment, were down. A trap, a summons, an opening. The entire logic of the defense changed in the space between heartbeats. Hold no longer meant hold. Survival no longer lay behind walls. Dorn stared at the icon of Horus's ship and understood that the last fortress had become a blade. "Prepare teleport assault parameters," he said. Archimus looked at him. "The palace?" Dorn did not look away from the vengeful spirit. "The palace will hold until it cannot." "And us?" Dorn's voice was colder than the void between worlds. "We cut out the heart. The signal should not have existed." Every instrument in the command chamber declared it impossible before accepting that impossibility had become fact. The vengeful spirit hung above Terra like a wound in the heavens, a black continent of iron and hatred, the flagship of the War Master, the heart of the rebellion, the throne from which Horus had dragged the galaxy into fratricide. Its shields had endured lance strike, torpedo storm, curse, prayer, and the wrath of the Imperial fleet. They had burned through every assault and remained inviolate. Now they were gone. The hololith showed the change as a simple thing. A shell of light around the enemy vessel dimmed, guttered, and vanished. The chamber saw it. The chamber heard the machine spirits confirm it. Chamber felt the meaning of it move through the air like a blade drawn slowly across bone. A trap, a chance. Both truths occupied the same breath. Dorn stood before the projection and did not speak at once. Around him, officers whispered confirmations across voxnets. Astropaths sobbed blood into brass bowls as they forced the signal through layers of warp static. Mechanicum adepts argued in clipped binharic bursts, their hands moving over consoles slick with oil and plasma burns. The palace shook beneath bombardment. Somewhere above, the Eternity Gate held back the howling of Angron, world-eaters, demons, and the damned. Somewhere below, entire districts were being sealed, burned, flooded, abandoned or converted into fresh barricades made from the bodies of their defenders. The vengeful spirit waited. Archimus stepped closer. His armor bore new scars from the inner approaches. Dust and blood filled the joints. Lord, confirmation is repeated from 3 fleet ghosts and the inner astropathic choir. The shields are down. They are inviting us, Dorn said. Or baiting us. Yes. Fafnir Ran stood behind Archimus, one side of his warplate patched with emergency bonding and blackened sealant. The wound he had taken at Lion's Gate had not been repaired so much as ordered to stop mattering. His face was pale beneath dried blood. He had refused a medici cradle. No one had wasted time forcing him into one. Ran spat a dark clot onto the floor grating. Then let us answer. Dorn looked past him to the broader palace grid. The inner lines flickered. The Eternity Gate still held. The sanctum remained sealed. But the traitor pressure was increasing everywhere, and the shape of the defense was narrowing toward extinction. If Dorn remained, the palace might hold longer. If he left, its final coordination would suffer. But if no one struck at Horus, the palace would fall eventually, and every wall Dorn had built would become only the architecture of mankind's grave. Staying guaranteed collapse. Leaving might doom the defense. That was enough. Summon Sigismund, Dorn said. The first captain came quickly. He entered the command chamber with the calm of a weapon already drawn. His armor was scarred black and yellow, his sword cleaned and ready, despite the filth of the siege. Blood had dried beneath the gorget, and one eye lens of his helm was cracked. He removed the helm and knelt. My lord. Dorn regarded him. The floor remained. Faith lived in Sigismund now, a dark, bright thing, dangerous because it made obedience burn hotter than reason. Dorn did not forgive it. He did not need to. He required function, not purity. You will remain. Sigismund lifted his gaze. With the palace? With the Imperial fists? For the first time, something like pain moved across the first captain's face. My place is at your side. No, your place is where I put you. Sigismund bowed his head again, slower this time. By your command. You will hold the inner approaches. You will deny traitor champions. You will break enemy command where it enters blade reach. You will not seek death. You will not open sealed gates. You will not lead a countercharge for honor. You will make yourself an executioner. Sigismund's eyes hardened. Whose executioner? Theirs. It was not comfort. It was not forgiveness. It was purpose, and Sigismund accepted it the way a starving man accepts iron rations. Something settled inside him. The commander receded. The myth that would one day wear his name took another step into being, dour, merciless, black of temper, a killer of traitor champions beneath the dying light of terror. Dorn turned to the command staff. "All palace orders are final, unless countermanded by the Emperor himself," he said. "No general retreat, no evacuation, no surrender, no rescue missions beyond assigned parameters. No sealed gate is to be opened under any circumstance. No civilian mass is to move without military purpose. No wounded formation is to be extracted if extraction compromises a line. No officer is to preserve men for tomorrow at the expense of the current hour. There may be no tomorrow." The orders passed into the Voxnet. Men would hear them in trenches, tunnels, chapels, ammunition vaults, and smoke-choked avenues. Some would understand, some would curse, some would obey only because discipline remained when hope did not. That was enough. Dorn faced Archimus and ran. He did not call them sons. He did not need to wound himself with the word. "Archimus, you are the eastern hinge. If it fails, the Sanctum Road opens. You will die there before it does." Archimus bowed. "Yes, Lord." "Ran, you are the western wound. Your formations are broken. Use them as broken things are used. Block, delay, counter-strike where possible, collapse where necessary. If you cannot hold ground, make the ground impassable." Ran smiled with blood on his teeth. "That I can do. If either of you is cut off, you remain in place. If either of you is surrounded, you remain in place. If either of you is offered extraction at cost to the line, refuse it. Your lives now buy increments. Spend them properly." Archimus accepted the words in silence. Ran laughed once, low and bitter. "You make affection sound like engineering, Lord." Dorn looked at him. "Affection is irrelevant." "Is it?" "Yes." Ran's smile faded. He nodded. "Then we will be irrelevant in the correct place." That, Dorn accepted. The Emperor came without announcement. The chamber changed before anyone turned. The light seemed to retreat from lesser things and gather around him. Not golden radiance as poets would one day lie, not kindness made visible, not comfort. His presence was pressure, sovereign and terrible, a will so vast that mortal minds near him bent like reeds before a storm. Custodians moved with him, silent and perfect, Valdor among them in Auramite warplate, guardian spear in hand, his expression unreadable. Sanguinius came as well, bloodied, wing feathers torn, yet still luminous in the manner of a blade catching the last sun before night. For a moment, Dorn looked at his father and saw not the ruler of mankind, not the architect of the Imperium, not the dream around which all this atrocity had been built. He saw the center of the equation, the one piece that could not be allowed to fall. The Emperor looked upon the projection of the vengeful spirit. No one asked whether it was a trap. All traps had entrances. Sanguinius stood beside Dorn. His face was weary beyond mortal language. "The gate holds." "For now," Dorn said. "For now is all we have ever truly possessed." Dorn did not answer. Valdor checked the teleport coordinates with Mechanicum adepts, whose hands shook as they interfaced with the assault pattern. The vengeful spirit's interior readings were corrupted. Deck plans contradicted themselves. Bulkhead sequences repeated where no repetition should exist. Spatial logic collapsed and reformed in impossible knots. The flagship was no longer merely a ship. The warp had entered it too deeply. Horus had become too much a vessel for the powers behind him. His flagship had become a labyrinth wounded by ascension, a place where steel remembered lies and corridors dreamed of murder. "Teleport cohesion will be unstable," said Amagos, half his face twitching from scrap code scars. "Enemy interference probable. Transit scatter likely. Recovery uncertain." Valdor's voice was calm. "State the useful part." The Magos inclined his metal skull. "We can place you aboard. We cannot promise where." "Enough," Dorn said. Sanguinius looked toward the sealed routes leading back to the gate. The sound of war reached them even here, muffled by stone and adamantium. "They will need to believe we can return." They need to hold whether we return or not. The angel studied him. You would deny them even that hope? I would deny the enemy entry. Sanguinius gave a sad smile. Always the wall. Always. The teleport array awakened. It did not feel like light. It felt like dismemberment without blood. Reality took hold of Dorn's atoms and issued them orders no flesh should obey. The chamber stretched. Sound became pressure. The hololith became a smear of color. The palace vanished by degrees, first the walls, then the floor, then the presence of his sons, then terror itself. For one instant, there was nothing. Then the vengeful spirit took him. He arrived alone. The corridor around him was too narrow, then too vast, then correct only because his senses rejected further contradiction. The walls were black iron veined with amber light. Flesh grew between some of the plates, pulsing softly. Cables hung like wet intestines from the ceiling. The deck beneath his boots was ribbed metal in one heartbeat and polished marble in the next. Far away, or near enough to touch, men screamed in languages Dorn knew, and languages he had buried with conquered worlds. His helm display failed, recovered, lied, corrected itself, failed again. Archimus, he voxed, static. Sanguinius, nothing. Valdor. A whisper answered in a voice that sounded like a dead Imperial fist from a century before. Father. Dorn cut the channel. The corridor extended ahead of him. Behind him, it had become a wall of yellow stone, engraved with the names of men he had ordered to die. He recognized the first name, then the next, then too many. Captains, sappers, army generals, void admirals, unknown laborers rendered into statistics, habitation stacks sealed into firebreaks, wounded loyalists abandoned behind blast doors, men burned in triage cloisters, civilians reduced to obstruction, regiments left to fix an enemy for artillery, fleet crews ordered to die in place so their wrecks could become useful. The vengeful spirits spoke with their mouths. Was it worth it? The words came from the walls, from the deck, from the cables that twitched like nerves. Dorn walked forward. Was survival purchased by atrocity still victory? The corridor became the processional of stellar compliance, as it had been before he ordered its beauty stripped. Gold returned to the walls. Statues stood whole. Marble shone beneath his boots. Then the vision blackened. The statues broke. The gold peeled away. Workers screamed as molten promethium flooded the avenue. The palace rebuilt itself around him as accusation. Dorn kept walking. He passed Gate Heliostat as it closed again and again. Blood angels trapped outside, fists striking the sealed door from the wrong side. He passed Bastion Gathalamor at the moment of detonation, loyal wounded looking up as fire found them. He passed Admiral Coven upon a dying bridge, face freezing, one hand on the scuttle rune. He passed the sealed habitation stacks, where millions sat in darkness, listening to vents close and ration lines die. He passed a boy hauling ammunition beneath the mercury wall. He passed a medici cloister full of wounded men as promethium entered through the grates. None of them attacked him. That was the cruelty of the vision. They only asked. Dorn's torment was not fear. Fear required the belief that one might be spared. Dorn had never granted himself that indulgence. His torment was accounting. The warp placed every cost before him and demanded he confess that arithmetic had become damnation. He stopped in a corridor whose ceiling was the sky of terror before it burned. Around him stood the dead of his orders, not rotting, not accusing with theatrical rage, merely present. A wall of witnesses. A mortal soldier with half his head gone spoke with a voice like dust. Was my death necessary? Yes, Dorn said. A sealed worker with blackened fingers asked. Was mine? Yes. A wounded Imperial fist, still legless, still propped beside his last grenade, asked, And if you are wrong? Dorn looked at him. Then I am wrong after doing what reason allowed. The dead leaned closer. Their faces multiplied. Their eyes became firing slits. Their mouths became wounds in the walls. "What is the difference between duty and atrocity?" they asked. "Victory." The answer did not cleanse him. It was not meant to. The dead did not vanish. The guilt did not lift. Dorn accepted both as he accepted scars, ammunition expenditure, and structural loss. Guilt was irrelevant until the war was over. If damnation was the price of keeping the Emperor's dream from extinction, then damnation was acceptable. The false sky cracked. The corridor returned, black, wet, immense, and wrong. Dorn moved on. Somewhere deeper in the flagship, beyond false histories, beyond impossible halls, beyond the laughter of gods that had never deserved worship, another presence burned brighter than the surrounding dark. Wings moved through shadow. A blade was drawn. A son reached the father's murderer before the wall could reach him. Sanguinius had found Horus first. The palace was almost dead, and still it killed. Its guns fired from broken mouths. Its walls stood where they had no right to stand, split from crown to foundation, blackened by lance fire, mortars, demonic flame, and the endless impact of bodies hurled against them. Its towers leaned like wounded giants. Its avenues were clogged with wreckage, corpses, shattered armor, fallen banners, and rivers of blood thickened by ash. Ammunition lifts had jammed from heat warp and overuse. Shell trains lay derailed in transit tunnels. Mortar pits were silent because the crews were dead, or because their last rounds had been fired, or because no one remained with hands enough to load them. Men still fought there. They fought around guns too hot to touch with bare flesh. They wrapped their hands in rags, in torn uniforms, in the flayed leather of dead harnesses, and kept feeding belts into heavy bolters whose barrels glowed dull red. They fought with laser guns that had lost their charge packs, with bayonets broken at the tip, with entrenching tools, knives, pistols, stones, teeth. They fought in heaps around barricades built from sandbags, ceramite slabs, and bodies frozen together by blood and heat. They fought while demons laughed from beyond the sealed gates, and traitor artillery walked inward, street by street, prayer by prayer, breath by breath. The titans that still stood were burning. One loyal engine, its name lost beneath static and reactor scream, knelt beside a collapsed transit basilica and fired its last weapon until a mortis reaver cut through its torso with a beam of white ruin. Its princeps died, still linked to the machine spirit, and the god engine toppled slowly, majestically, crushing a swarm of world eaters, loyal dead, traitor dead, and the wounded who had crawled beneath it seeking shelter. A warhound of Legio Ignatum limped through smoke on one shattered leg, its void shields gone, its hull open to the air, crew corpses hanging from rupture wounds in its flank. It fired once into the red tide, destroyed a traitor engine of lesser breed, then died under missiles that made its plasma heart bloom into a second sun. The custodes were fewer now. That truth passed through the palace like a blasphemy. Gold lay broken in places where no mortal could go. Guardian spears stood planted beside dead masters. Auramite helms rolled across blood-slick floors beneath the boots of demons and men. The 10,000 did not fall back like other warriors. They diminished by verdict, each death purchased against something that would have reached the Emperor had they not stood. Where they fought, the enemy died in beautiful and terrible precision. Where they died, the road behind them sealed. The Imperial fists had ceased to be a legion in any shape that parade ground language could understand. They were knots of resistance now, isolated bastions of yellow and black amid red ruin. Squads fought without vox contact. Companies no longer knew if their captains lived. Captains no longer knew if the Primarch still breathed. They held stairwells, gate hinges, ammunition vaults, shield relays, corpse bridges, sanctum corridors, and nameless doors, because those places had been assigned to them. Some had no ammunition. They still held. Some had no officers. They still held. Some had no living brothers beside them. they still held. Sigismund stood at the edge of the inner approach, where the traitors came in champions. He had become a shape the enemy learned to fear between heartbeats. His armor was blackened, its yellow almost gone beneath soot and drying blood. His sword was wet to the hilt. Around him lay the dead of several legions, warriors who had come howling their titles and oaths across the broken stones, sons of Horus officers, world-eaters berserkers, emperor's children duelists, death guard reavers, men whose names would have meant something. In another war died with their throats opened, their helms split, their hearts pierced, their pride cut from them before the end. A traitor champion came through the smoke, carrying a chain axe in each hand and a necklace of Imperial fist hands around his throat. He roared a challenge that shook blood from the cracked ceiling. Sigismund did not answer. The champion charged. Sigismund stepped inside the first axe, cut through the warrior's wrist, turned beneath the second, and drove his blade through the traitor's throat seal. He twisted the sword free and let the body fall forward. It struck the stones on its knees, as if in prayer, then collapsed face first in the gore. A mortal soldier behind Sigismund laughed once. It was not mirth. It was the last shape of sanity leaving him. "They are breaking," the man whispered. Sigismund looked into the smoke where more shapes moved. "No, they are dying harder." A vox signal came then, fractured by static, relayed through channels that should have been dead. It crossed the palace in fragments. It reached commanders as half-words, reached gunners as bursts of sacred noise, reached dying men as rumor carried by blood-caked mouths. Guilliman was coming. The avenging sun was racing for Terra. Loyalist fleets had been sighted. Reinforcements were nearing the throne world. The storm around Seoul was no longer without end. Somewhere beyond the burning sky, salvation had velocity. The news did not bring joy. It brought agony. Hours mattered now, not days, not campaigns. Hours. If the palace held long enough, mankind might endure. If it failed before the reinforcements broke through, the Emperor's dream would die within sight of rescue. Every man who heard the rumor understood its cruelty. Hope had returned only to sharpen fear. A gunner with both legs gone dragged himself back to his weapon when the Vox carried the words. His loader was dead, so he used one hand to pull the ammunition belt and the other to depress the firing rune. The heavy bolter bucked and threw him backward, reopening the stump wounds cauterized by battlefield heat. He crawled forward again. "Hold," he rasped. No one knew whether he spoke to the gun, the wall, or himself. Aboard the vengeful Spirit, Dorn walked through a ship that did not remain a ship. Its corridors turned upon themselves. Its walls showed him Terra burning, then Inwit beneath ice, then the palace before demolition, then the faces of sons he had sent to die. Doors opened into battlefields already past. Deck plates shifted into marble, bone, mud, iron and ash. Dead voices moved through the Vox, wearing the tones of men he had loved too little and used too well. The warp wanted him to rage. It wanted him to weep. It wanted confession, surrender, collapse. Dorn gave it motion. He moved forward. His armor was scored. His blade was drawn. Blood, not all his own, marked his gauntlets. He had killed things that wore the faces of old brothers. He had cut through shadows that bled like men. He had ignored pleas from mouths that should never have opened again. He did not know how long he had been aboard. Time had no honor in that place. Distance had no discipline. The flagship of Horus had become a wound around a throne, and every passage was infected by the godhood gathering at its heart. Then the ship screamed, not through air, through being. Dorn felt it in his teeth, in the bones beneath his armor, in the scars of his mind. Something radiant had been extinguished. Something impossible had fallen. He knew before he saw. Sanguinius was dead. The knowledge did not strike him like grief. Not yet. It entered him as a fact too vast for the moment of its arrival. The angel had reached Horus first. The angel had stood where no other could stand. The angel had died. Dorn ran. Elsewhere in the ship, the Emperor moved toward Horus. The master of mankind advanced through the heart of treachery with power that made the darkness recoil and hunger in equal measure. Around him, reality buckled under the strain of what he was and what Horus had become. The War Master waited as a son, as a king, as a vessel, as a weapon held in the hands of thirsting gods. Their meeting shook more than the ship. It pressed against the soul of every warrior on Terra, though few knew why their hearts faltered, why demons screamed, why traitors howled in sudden triumph and sudden fear. Dorn did not see the duel. That was the cruelty that remained for him. He had built walls around the last hope of mankind. He had spent armies, cities, and sons to bring the war to this single impossible moment. And when the father faced the fallen son, Dorn was elsewhere, trapped in a labyrinth of lies and blood, too late to stand between them, too late to bear the blow, too late to save anyone who mattered most. The vengeful spirit convulsed. The laughter of the gods became a shriek of cheated hunger. The walls bled light. Dorn broke through the final passage and found ruin. Sanguinius lay upon the deck, wings spread in death, beautiful even in destruction, broken in a way the universe should not have permitted. Blood pooled beneath him, bright against the black iron. His face was still. The angel who had made men stand when all reason had failed would never rise again. Horus was gone, not dead in the way men died, not
merely slain. The War Master's absence was a wound in the chamber, a space where a soul had been unmade so utterly that even hatred found no corpse to cling to. His armor lay ruined. The gods that had filled him had withdrawn or been burned back into the warp, howling, denied their prize at the instant of triumph, and the Emperor was broken. He lay amid the wreckage of victory, no longer the unapproachable sovereign presence that had bent the great crusade around his will. His armor was torn open. His body was a ruin of wounds that would have ended any being not made for impossibility. Blood soaked the deck beneath him. Light still clung to him, but faintly, as fire clings to coals buried in ash. His face, the face that had been father, monarch, weapon and dream, seemed suddenly far older than the species he had tried to master. Dorn stopped. For one heartbeat, the Praetorian of Terra ceased to move. That was all the war allowed. Then command returned like a blade pushed through the chest. "Extraction," Dorn said. His voice came out low, hoarse, absolute. No one answered. He opened every channel his armor could still reach. "This is Rogal Dorn. Priority absolute. Locked to my signal. The Emperor lives. Sanguinius has fallen. Horus is slain. Prepare immediate extraction. Prepare containment. Prepare the throne." Static tore at his words. He repeated them. Valdor's voice came through at last, distant and hard, with something even his discipline could not bury. "Confirmed. The Emperor requires immediate transfer. Medicae? No Medicae craft will suffice. No conventional intervention will suffice. Prepare the Golden Throne for full life sustainment and psychic stabilization. Summon every surviving Technarch, Genitor, Chirurgeon and Mechanicum adept with clearance to breathe near the sanctum. Kill any who delay." Understood. Dorn knelt beside the Emperor. Only then did his gauntlet hesitate. Not for long. Long enough for the dead angel to seem to fill the chamber. Long enough for the silence to gather around him. Long enough that even the custodes entering through teleport flare and broken corridors did not speak when they saw their lord. Dorn lifted the Emperor. The master of mankind weighed less than the Imperium he had made, and more than any son should have been asked to bear. Blood ran over Dorn's arms. It seeped into the joints of his armor. It steamed where damaged power fields touched it. He rose with the Emperor held against him and turned once toward Sanguinius. No words came. The silence was so complete that the custodians halted at its edge. Then Dorn walked. Terra received the news in fragments and lies and screams.
Horus was dead. The words passed through the palace like a detonation that made no sound. Some men fell to their knees. Some laughed until they choked. Some did not believe it and kept firing. Some believed it and kept firing anyway, because the traitors had not vanished. The enemy did not dissolve when the War Master died. Many broke, many fled, many lost cohesion and became animals with bolters. Others fought harder, cornered by the death of their master, driven by rage, by demons, by shame, by the refusal to let the loyalists have even the taste of victory without more blood. Sigismund heard the words while cutting a path through another knot of traitor champions. "Horus is slain," came the Vox fragment. "The Emperor lives. The angel has fallen." For a moment, his sword lowered. Around him, Imperial fists and mortal soldiers heard it. The Blood Angels heard it too, and a sound went through them that was worse than any battle cry. Grief became fury. Fury became slaughter. They hurled themselves at the traitors with red tears on their faces and death in their hands. Imperial fists advanced beside them, colder, harder, closing gaps, sealing corridors, executing what remained of the enemy push. There was no joy, only exhausted slaughter. A son of Horus captain, his armor split and his banner burning, tried to rally warriors around him. Sigismund reached him before the words became command. Their blades crossed once. The second stroke took the traitor's head. Sigismund caught it by the top knot before it hit the floor and threw it back into the enemy ranks. "Your War Master is dead," he said. The traitors answered with gunfire. The killing continued. Dorn returned to the palace with the Emperor and did not permit grief to enter the room before duty. The Golden Throne was prepared as the last machinery of hope and horror. Adepts died connecting systems never meant to bear such strain. Technicians were dragged from collapsed sanctums with broken limbs and ordered to work until they expired. Custodes formed walls of gold around the transfer chambers. Imperial fists sealed every approach. Menials carried cables as thick as tree trunks through pools of blood. The Emperor's ruined body was placed where no son should have had to place his father. Dorn gave orders until the words became iron filings in his throat. Seal the western sanctum. Purge the lower access. Confirm Guilliman's vector. Deny pursuit routes to broken traitor formations. Recover the angel's body. Secure the throne chamber. Prepare counteroffensive staging. Find survivors with command authority. Execute deserters. Catalogue enemy withdrawal. Only when duty had momentum did the fracture show. Not weeping, not a cry, not a speech over the dead. Dorn stood apart from the throne chamber's light, his armor still stained with the Emperor's blood, and Sanguinius's death reflected in eyes that did not blink. Men avoided him. Custodes did not approach. Even Valdor, forged for proximity to the impossible, hesitated before speaking. The silence around Dorn was not peace. It was collapse held in place by will. A lesser man would have broken. Dorn postponed breaking because the war had not given permission. Outside, Terra turned toward Dorn. The light that came through the smoke was weak, red, and filthy. It touched the Imperial palace and revealed what night, fire, and bombardment had hidden. The walls still stood, but they were mutilated beyond recognition. Gold was gone beneath soot. Marble was gone beneath blood. Towers were severed. Gatehouses were cracked open. The approaches were black with ash and human remains. Bodies lay in drifts against the bastions. Tanks burned in avenues that had once hosted triumphs. Titan corpses smoked in the distance like fallen cathedrals. The air stank of promethium, rot, hot metal, ruptured bowels, and the chemical bitterness of a world that had survived by becoming a grave. Guilliman was coming. The traitors were breaking. The Emperor lived and did not live. Sanguinius was dead. Horus was gone. The palace remained. Rogal Dorn stood upon a shattered height and looked over Terra. Around him, commanders waited for orders. Behind him, The throne consumed the last possible shape of his father's survival. Before him lay the work still to be done: pursuit, purge, rebuilding, vengeance, fortification, accounting. There would be no celebration. Celebration was a luxury for wars that ended cleanly. This one had only changed shape. Ran stood nearby, bandaged beneath cracked armor. Archimus was gone from sight, somewhere in the corpse dark of the lines, or perhaps dead in place as ordered. Sigismund still fought below, turning retreating traitors into offerings for a future he did not yet understand. The palace groaned in the morning wind. Dorn looked upon the ruin he had made endure. "It held," he said. No one answered. It was the closest he came to morning.